a model of belief, which brings us to the topic of this episode: how to do content and context reframes so that we might start to influence beliefs. Perhaps beliefs we hold, or perhaps beliefs others hold that we wish to influence, which at the moment seems of paramount importance as there is resistance, strong resistance to accepting legitimate elections, resistance to well worked through and developed and proven and tested vaccines, resistance to scientific discovery, and outright denial of climate change, and then all that flat earth crap on top. Lots of conspiratorial thinking in the blogospheres these days, and I can't tell if it's people trying to bait the more ignorant for a bit of money, or whether it is actually people being genuine and for some reason putting this stuff out there in the hopes that they'll be believed, or that it will change things. And there again, there's a belief that just giving people information will make changes in the world. That itself is a belief, but it doesn't always work that way. We'll get onto it a bit later, but the simple example is weight loss. But really simply, and I know there's a little bit of nuance, but put simply, calories in, calories out, eat less, exercise more, you'll lose weight as long as the deficit occurs. Some people may believe that, some people may not, but I don't know whether giving people more information about Krebs cycle and how sugars and carbohydrates and fats are broken down in the body, or about how exercise actually works. I don't know whether giving people more information necessarily changes behaviour. So beliefs are extremely powerful and influential in how we respond to stimuli. So I'm wondering if it'd be beneficial if we knew how to influence beliefs conversationally. So one thing to keep in mind, and it seems a useful frame of mind, is that fun and laughter is always a means to shorten the distance between beliefs, and I'm kind of assuming that to be present throughout the entire of this discussion. So it seems like, again, we talked about this in the Bob Iger series, when we engage with people, it's to engage where they are, it's to engage to create a better experience, and it's to engage where any change that we can create is one that's fun to have. It's the better option than the one that they already have. Making it painful and slow and uncomfortable and awkward and full of conflict seems to me, even if we are right, it's not going to be easily adopted. So it's been on my mind, and I think I've hinted on the channel, I've always wanted to look more closely at beliefs. So I'm going to lay out what I've learned. So the previous video regarding John Stuart Mills and the so-called Mills method being the basis, very, very basics for scientific inquiry, and to find causal relations, or at least a starting point to find causal relations. And his search for identifying causes will come in handy here as a reminder, since one aspect of beliefs is that they are generalizations about causal relations. And that's the first thing to note about beliefs. They are statements of relationship. The first issue then is that there's nothing to touch, unlike empirical data, which can be verified by measurement, weight, dimension, time. And to hint at a bit of a philosophical question, as in Ontology 1, we asked if distance itself is actually a thing. In the same sense we can measure time, it is a kind of quasi-illusion. We do notice the passing of events, and some of those events are extremely well calibrated to a thing that we can peg to something called seconds. Anyway, philosophical notions aside, real things, as it were, we can sense. We can feel, we can touch, we can experience directly. Beliefs, which are statements about relations and relations themselves, not so touchy-feely. So it's a little bit of a joke to say that currency, money currency, is merely the promise, and likewise is backed only by the faith that it will one day actually be paid. So while some might hold the belief that time is money, it might be more accurate to say currency is time. Equally ephemeral, but when you run out of either, they do feel pretty fucking real. So I'm not so sure that when we say things like no pain, no gain, or no guts, no glory, that these express deep-seated beliefs, or if they are merely mechanical linguistic responses, things we've heard so often that they've actually lost their meaning. But the vestiges remain in the vernacular that when one runs out of things to say, these overworked and worn-out phrases can be used as space fillers in otherwise stilted conversations. something safe and uncontroversial to say rather than endure the uncomfortable silence. Well-worn phrases that once were the wisdom of their day, general truths, general beliefs, common ground that we utter, such that we then seem like normal people, like ordinary people, like the person we're talking to. We have a shared culture and shared national identity. By saying these things, we're saying, I'm safe. I know the game. I know the words to say in conversation, in polite conversation. It kind of creates a bond of identity. Yeah, well, I know these kind of well-worn phrases as well as you do. Let me demonstrate by saying one. Or perhaps we might use different expressions of being based. Poggers. Or we might say, look at these LARPing boomers, OTL. Messages and signals are very different belonging. Internet culture, even Twitter culture has its own language. And then, we've got things like gay Twitter, trans Twitter, not fashion, but fascism Twitter. It's quite remarkable. So yeah, the well-worn phrases that we choose to use to the discerning ear give away so much about us. In fact, there was one study I was reading, and I can't remember where. It was a few years ago, and it was it might have been in this book I'm reading about online privacy and data security and data privacy, that if you give this piece of software that has developed your Twitter handle, it just looks at who you're connected to and who's connected to you, and through that alone can make very good predictions on your age, your ethnicity, your geographic location, your political bias, your sexual bias, probably the amount of money you've got in the bank, and a few other factors, just by knowing who you follow and who follows you. Yeah. See, data between the lines. And just as an interesting question and an aside, who owns that data? Then it's kind of like a metadata, isn't it? It's data about data. Is that yours? I mean, it was derived from your data, but who owns that? Anyway, interesting questions for another time. If then beliefs, causal beliefs, are more profound, and we covered this a bit last time, causality, our model of the world, and our beliefs about how it's held together, and how we can have confidence in the predictions of well-tested models. And from this confidence, we can have a certain easing of anxiety about the future, even though it doesn't really exist. Abstractions. That's another interesting subject. They found, for example, with feral children who have been, self-raised in the woods, which is not so common these days, they've discovered that these children who grow up without language haven't self-developed concepts of things like the past and the future. And if they reach a reasonable age of maturity, I think beyond years of 8, 9 or 10, the brain seems to have lost its plasticity in terms of being able to develop these abstractions. So they have a real difficult time. Even when they are taught language later in life, they have a hard time abstracting and thinking of the world outside of their own self-perception. For example, there is only the here and now where I am. The future and the past are these abstractions that they struggle with. So it seems language and the acquisition of language has an effect on the structure of brain or mind that allows us to do these abstractions. So I suppose the ability to make reliable predictions gives us at least a sense of control, and even actual control when those models are excellent and highly reliable. Unlike, say, shitty chakra, woo-woo, law of attraction shit, or prayer, whatever. Beliefs are also about meanings. For example, if someone were to say, if I get sick, it means, each person has many different answers, or many different ways to complete that sentence. If I get sick, it means I am weak. If I get sick, it means God doesn't love me. If I get sick, it means I'm working too hard. If I get sick, it's because I picked out on Christmas cake and one too many Courvoisiers. Maybe so. This obviously gets complex, as these causal and meaning relationships can get intertwined. We might imagine a belief expressed as something in the environment causes me to be ill. This means I can never get what I want. So this sounds bizarre without context, it's just content, but that's the point. The context supports and reinforces and in some cases justifies the content claim, though of course it doesn't mean it's actually correct or that it actually has any causal relation. But there's that belief now that in the example we just said, something in the environment causes me to be ill, this means. So there's a belief created using these intertwined assumptions about things in the environment that has a causal relation that has something to do with me, and then that has a meaning that I extend to the future, which is an abstraction about what I can and cannot get. So I'll get on to this, but digression time already. Cults, where belief trumps everything. Oh, bugger, I said I'd never say his name again, but this isn't that Trump, alas. So I'm reading a book about the JamesTown catastrophe, and for cross-reference, I checked out a couple of documentaries, some of them on YouTube, and scrolled through the comments. JamesTown, by the way, is the infamous incident where 900 people died from drinking what has come to be known as the Kool-Aid, though some say it was actually cheaper Flavor-Aid. But either way, it makes light of the travesty that instigated the phrase. So I read a few of the comments in the comment section of these documentaries on YouTube as well, and they were full of expressions about how the author of the comment would not now go to JamesTown because it's likely haunted, or filled with negative energy, or that the souls of the dead will never rest, since souls cannot rest when someone takes their own life. And I have to wonder if these commentators had actually watched the documentary. It's too simplistic and mostly wrong to conclude it was actually suicide, and it's equally simplistic to rule it entirely as murder, though certainly the fact that the poisons were on site ahead of time is strong evidence that it was at least premeditated. And it seems that one commenter who was convinced that souls exist held certain beliefs about what is and is not possible, about such things in the future, about getting and not getting certain things in respect of mortal actions. Here in the comment section, I found all sorts of complex beliefs that led commenters to make claims about actions, explanations, statements about what's possible, in the case of souls, hauntings, negative energies, and what is possible or impossible, or what was necessary or unnecessary, or what this means or what it doesn't mean. In summary, lots of generalizations about the relationships between causal things, limits, and meanings. The point seemed lost on these commentators, their own unfounded claims and statements based on nothing except their own beliefs, stated as matter of fact. We do it all, generalization, the time. Time abstracted. There's a great example. We do it all the time. And I'll come on to this structure of sentence, but I just realised that it also follows the model of English language, a subject, a verb, and an object. We do it all the time. And that's its beautiful generalisation. Anyway, life isn't without its coincidences. And yet to resolve that one. But of the JamesTown documentary reenactments, one of the commentators said that Denis Leary played the part of the cult leader Jim Jones fantastically well. This commenter was corrected, as it was Rick Roberts who played the part. Somewhat undeterred, the original commenter stated that he wasn't 100% sure it was Leary, but he had the idea, and that was good enough. Yeah, just having ideas and making assertions from them. I had to laugh. It's the pathway to cultism, but the irony is contained in a kind of pill of twisted sadness. Many people who ended up there were vulnerable people, disenfranchised people, and had hope for some kind of reformation, or hope for a social utopia, or hope for somewhere that they could find their place in all this madness. It was hope that led them there. Some were dissatisfied with their current religion, some with the social injustices in the world, others sought a long-lost family in the People's Temple. However, unrelated and in a totally different context, Denis Leary himself actually said, quote, "I want you to take away the hope because that's the thing that's killing me," close quote. That's one of those ironic things, totally unrelated, but couldn't be more apt. Maybe that's why the commentator made the connection, because maybe they'd heard Denis Leary make that quote and made the connection, and it did look a bit like him anyway. So what I'm proposing here is to explicate belief structures, which will take this video and the next, and then see how this applies to things like the JamesTown tragedy. Perhaps a dip into cults, and that might set up us nicely for a dip into propaganda, and then we can get back onto the main thread on science, philosophy, wars, and all that good stuff. And we should by then have a broader view of how and why things go wrong, and hopefully knowing what a trap of thinking or a trap of propaganda or a trap of the cult looks like, we can avoid future ones. So I'm going to have to get through a few definitions to better describe what we're talking about. And the first thing, I suppose, is to talk about the embracing structural partner to beliefs. And I mean this in the same way that Waitskin meant when he talked about martial arts and chess. The kind of counterpart to beliefs is the meta model. In martial arts, chess and dancing, the art emerges from two people acting in unison in response to the other, as Waitskin described. And likewise, meta models are the counterpart to our beliefs. And since we can't talk about both of them simultaneously, and since I've been meaning to cover this off for some time, I'm in a quandary as to which to actually describe first. Either way, we're going to need to talk about some definitions so we know what we're talking about. So the meta model is a brief collection of essentially questions that is used to recover information. It's a little bit like the Mills methods we covered off last time. The meta model is a deliberate toolkit. Consider the difference between constantly asking why, and you get a certain type of answer because. So simplistically and superficially, imagine then in a world where only why is asked, suddenly someone asks why not. We suddenly start to get a different set of answers. And if we're switched on, we ourselves make a point of being deliberately selective in which question to ask at any given moment to elicit useful information, and we do it with volition. We either ask why or why not to recover pertinent information on both sides of the same coin. So I've also been startled as well when I was in a little bit of venture capital many years ago. People used to, I want you to invest in this. It'll be you won't regret it. I promise it's the best thing since sliced bread. And, they'd be asking for all sorts of quantities of money. And that's one question to ask. Well, how much are you looking for? Another question I used to ask is, well, how much money would I have to pay you to not do this? And some of the answers I get would be were absolutely flummoxing. $1,000. I see. So if I paid you $1,000 now, that's it. You'd abandon this project. Yeah. Well, that's what it's worth then, is it? But you're asking for 100 grand to put into this that you think's only worth £1,000. Yeah, that's quite revealing. And that's what I say. It's the difference between asking why and why not. It recovers information on the other side of things that clearly, when someone says something ridiculous as that, they just haven't thought about it. So the meta model describes a full set of inquiring, obviously questions in response to a particular type of communication where information is missing or is ambiguous. And there's different types of missing information and different types of ambiguity we'll get onto that in the normal course of conversation we may have filled in by likely guessing or making assumptions, which allows us to form beliefs not based on the full set of evidence, but on the whim of our prior poor questioning, on the whim of our existing information, or on the limited information someone else has provided us. Say, for example, just one side of that coin, the why, which may be obfuscated or omitted, but revealed when we ask, well, why not? So again, before even getting onto the definitions, before the meta model, before beliefs, we need to talk about language for a few moments, specifically what are known as SVO languages, and English is one of those. These are SVOs, subject, verb, object languages, and I hope the connection to relational frame theory and object-oriented ontology, as discussed previously, suddenly come to mind. In SVO languages, for a sentence to convey meaning, it will contain a subject, verb, and an object, SVO. A something, an action, to or from or with an object, roughly speaking. Though the examples and specific instances of these can be explicitly omitted, those parts are implicitly present. Let's take an example. Well, there in that sentence is a subject, us. It's contained in the abbreviated let us, and take is the verb, and example is the object. Nice. This example, being its own example, is one of those elegant self-referencing cases that describes itself. Nice. But let's keep it simple and select another example that's not so self-referencing. You go shopping. Here the subject is explicitly you, and the verb could be contentious, but I'll suggest the most meaningful one is shopping. And the object is left out, but implied, as we know, we go to the shop to do shopping. The object is the shop. But it could be the more generalized town, village or city or mall, or even online. From those limited options, we can still infer pretty well intent and meaning. It's not so ambiguous as to be meaningless. Okay, this is our first example of missing information that is implied. Shop. Could be a place, could be a verb. It's one of those nominalizations where we've taken a verb and nounified it. Anyway, we might go shopping online, in which case we don't actually go anywhere. So our assumption about the implication may have been wrong. And this is where the meta model comes in. Like I said, with this toolkit, we become aware of the ambiguity through practice and spot sentences like this, where the three requirements are not explicitly stated. We know we need three, and if only two or only one are actually present, we know there is room for misunderstanding, assumptions, and implications that may not be correct. So this should put us on alert. So the first practice is to listen to sentences and check off the S, V, and O parts, and to begin to spot those sentences and utterances that have a shortfall. We can then decide if we need to recover information, and then how to do that in the best way. Is it the verb that's missing, the subject, or the object that we need to know more about to be able to make useful meaning from the utterance? In the example of I am going shopping, the subject is specified. I. The verb is specified, though not precisely with the word going, but the object is not present explicitly. So we might want to recover that information and ask where, or which shops, or what for. And our own assumption about which shops sell such items can be used to fill in the gaps. In the case of someone stating, I am going to the shop, though they may be specific with the name and location of a shop, the verb is implied. Why else do people go to the shops? It's not to work out on the bench press machine. So in this case, the information we want to confirm is to do what? While that is obvious, we can presume more specificity and clear that up by asking, what are you buying? But maybe they are just window shopping. And that comes back to the comment I made in regard to the verb not being fully specified. Online shopping, window shopping. So, to maintain rapport and have fun and keep it entertaining, rather than ask an obvious and direct and kind of condescending question like, oh, are you going to the shops to do shopping? We can slide it in more obliquely. A bit of retail therapy then, or ask which shops, and that might give an extra clue as to context from which we might derive a more specific sense. Yeah, I'm going to buy some meat and go to the butcher's. So technically the SVO parts are called grammatical items, and they have to be present to convey meaning. The less there are, the more ambiguous it gets. Shop. Is that an instruction? For who? At which shop? Or is it a question? Or an invitation? With only one piece of the SVO trifecta, the meaning is ambiguous, and this is, see this on like Facebook and YouTube comments all the time, and it really kind of annoys me. Someone will put a song up or something or other, some post, and then there'll be a one-word response. Lyrics. What, you want some? Or you have some? Or you can't hear lyrics? Or lyrics in what? It's just one word. What does that mean? I mean, I know. Oh, could you please type me out some lyrics? And you see, if they can't even be bothered to construct a meaningful sentence around their request, why on earth do they think someone's going to be bothered with taking half an hour to write out the lyrics to the song? But of course, pointing this out, they just get snarky, they get condescending. They'll soon write a few more words to give you a ticking off. Save yourself the time, just block them. Of course, it's easier with speech. We have cues in speech that we don't have in the written text. I'm sure this is obvious, the intonation patterns. Up is a question, down is a command, and flat is a statement. Not sure I did the command so well, that was better. Yeah, down is a command. And this is the whole thing of body language, tonal significance, analogical markings, anchorings, and so on. But leaving that aside for now, let's just focus on the linguistics, as it were. So there's something else to notice. The rabbit hole goes deeper, as it always does. So if we spread out these three grammatical items, put them on a chart, on a screen, on a video, and let's look at the first column. Subject. In our example, I first used, which was, quote, Let's take an example, end quote. The subject is us. In the second example, you go shopping, the subject is you. In this first column, we have a few choices. I, we, you, they, them, us, that sort of thing. And these can be categorized too. I want to put I and you in one row. I want to put they and we on another row. And I want to put he, she, it on the third row. And while I try to be sensitive and inclusive of others' personal pronouns, for the moment, I want to keep it simple, and for illustrated purposes, I'm going to keep out personal pronouns like they, sie and she, and which adds a layer of complication that would confuse the point that I'm making. Afterwards, we can add back in personal pronouns. So here's the list. And what's to notice, the first row talk about a singular I, a self-reference to a specific individual. You. You is the same. It's just I from another's point of view. That is when I reference, say, you, the listener, you would refer to the subject that I'm referring to, what I refer to as you, but from your point of view, from the listener's point of view, they would reference that same subject as I. So when I say you, and when you say I, it's the same object we're referring to, but the word used to reference it conveys the additional information of the perceptual position. They, we, same thing. They are a collection of people. We is a collection of people where one person is to be classed in or out of the group. They are a collection of people. But when that group is referred to as we, it conveys the meaning they plus I. That becomes we. So again, it conveys extra information about the perceptual position of the speaker. Are they in the group? We. Are they out the group? They. And finally, he, she refers to a specific individual. It also applies similarly for small toddlers and babies, and unfortunately also used in derogatory terms where people are making a big deal out of gender identification. However, here again, there is built into the word an implication of the individual concerned. He refers to the male gendered specific instance of a person, and she, female gender specific instance of a person. So using this subject descriptor places the speaker at an observation position. It's kind of like a neutral third position perception. So in summary, I is obviously first position. We're talking about things from our perspective within our body, from the reference of self. That is, the information that follows is a description from the I's point of view. I want to do. We is also from a first position, but in the collective form. You and they is a second position perception. The speaker is describing the world through the eyes, as it were, of the second position. Expressions like, you think that, is an expression of somebody else's perception from their point of view, expressed by the first person. And he, she is a kind of third person perceptual position, although we might say of a baby, it is crying, it wants milk. But notice how this can slide into a second position when the expression of empathy is increased. Ah, she wants a hug. Ah, he wants a cuddle. It seems strange to express this sentiment as, it wants a cuddle. That seems a little incongruent, and you'll notice the extra kind of distance implied. It's not even human. So how can I have empathy with it? So to say it wants a cuddle is a very strange incongruence. So again, the idea is that there's like these distances. I, very close, it's me. You, it's a bit further away from I, and it's from a second perceptual position. And they feels still a bit further away, and it, not even human now. So very subtle, but the words imply a distancing or an in-out group perception. So I bring this attention to explicitly decode the extra payload of information that's being conveyed when the speaker chooses which way to describe the subject. It infers how the speaker has positioned themselves, you, I, they, we, it. This is something I've tried to be cognizant of when recording these audios, to use the we. I'm going to talk about some particular subject rather than I am going to talk about some subject, even though you and I are obviously not together right now, but using we borrows from the inclusive first position perspective. So let's carry on. I think we've covered this before on the channel, the example. The dog chased the cat was chased by the dog. Which sentence is the most appealing? Well, it depends on who's listening. Is it a cat lover or a dog lover? You know, it's what people are interested in. It's what they identify with. You know, you, we, they, us, him, her, it. And as an aside, I'm sure you've met that guy. Yep, my very third perceptual position description, who doesn't concern himself with communicating effectively because they don't move perceptual perceptions but stay very much in the I frame. Come across as narcissistic, lacking empathy. In extreme forms, I suppose, Machiavellian and psychopathic. Though superficially, they know to use words like, we are all in this together. Just as an aside to an aside, I've noticed as well, certain world leaders seem to let the mask slip. When it's all about the profits, it's all I. But when it's about the losses, it's, well, we need to share the losses. It's socialism for the losses and capitalism for the profits. It's not even an ideologically consistent position. They don't have a position. They're just in it for themselves. So rather than shift perceptual positions and see things from other people's point of view, literally, perspective, he, this person we're talking about, will be of the opinion that you can just hire and fire people who fit. And they tend to say things like, you're fired, a lot. So rather than look at somebody who's perhaps made a mistake or has done a bad thing in business, rather than take the long view of re-educating them or considering their mistake the cost of doing business and education, they'll just fire that unit and get another unit in who can do the job. And that's how they see people, as units, as things, as a means to an end. Do these people serve their purpose? Again, it's not about we and the employees also getting something out of the deal. It's just what's in service of me. So we mentioned earlier about the feral children, and from some basic background reading, it seems that it's hypothesized that certain pathways in the brain are not developed. This is known as mental synthesis disability. The long and short of it is that it seems critical to stimulate a toddler's brain with the vast variety and combinations of possibilities, and to continue to do this until puberty, as that seems to be when the brain's plasticity for such things seems to harden. You'd have to check on this, I've not looked into it too much, but the formation of parts of the brain during the stage when it still has a reasonable plasticity will have an effect on future decision-making and risk-taking behaviours in adult life. So this opens a whole can of worms. The question is, stereotypically, if it has been tradition that boys are encouraged to participate in a wider gamut of experiences than young girls, who are confined stereotypically to homemaker roles, pink dresses, pushing plastic babies in prams, does this participation steer how these individuals will respond when they are an adult? I.e., does it train the brain differently at such a young age? It has been noticed, for example, the influence of television shows, and we mentioned, and will mention more in upcoming episodes, I'm sure, the influence of shows like Star Trek. We already talked about it a couple of episodes back. Probably going to come back to it in another couple. Another example was X-Files. When that ran in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was an uptick in the number of women entering vocations such as police, investigations, forensic sciences, and so on. It all has an influence. Anecdotally, and maybe there are studies, I'm sure, that have investigated whether a young child seeing different options and possibilities for themselves at least makes the thought of those things at least possible, which is the seed for actually doing that thing. If you didn't believe it was possible, you might not do it. If you didn't even know about it, you might not even know whether to think about whether it's possible or not. You just don't know. Hence the importance of toys, play, drawing, puzzles, and maths. Especially calculus, and get them on 3D software packages. And I suppose a good question to drill into young children is to ask them, in certain situations that occur, how do you think other children or kids or people will feel about that? Get them to see things from the other person's perspective and kind of step into their shoes and take on the feelings of the other person. And I should note that this is distinct from the more guilt and shaming question of how do you think that made them feel? And Pushing my armchair psychoanalysis to its limits, it's not hard to imagine a child who has never been told no, that because of this fails to develop a sense of others, their needs, and the occasional requirement to forego something, to be denied something, to refrain from something, to be told no, either by someone else or themselves, for the greater good. Pushing the armchair psychoanalysis even further, I might speculate about psychopaths that they lack what we were describing as empathy or the ability to shift perceptual positions or to have the ability to abstract thoughts. And from the little I have read, there seems to be some support for the idea that psychopaths are, in this respect, wired differently in terms of the prefrontal lobe, the moral centers of the brain, and the decision-making part of the brain in association and connection with the amygdala. I'm sure I've butchered that. It's still an active area of research, but it seems in some way similar to the development of the mind of the feral child. All right, let's leave that for now, but let me make one more observation, and it goes back several episodes to the introduction of Hofstadter's cultural index. The United States of America, for example, very individualistic. Interesting to note the reaction to the face mask mandates. Say China, very collectivist. Interesting to note the reaction to face mask mandates. However, also in the language of I and we and you and us, in particular, to agreements and contracts. And I think this crosses with politeness theory, which I've mentioned a couple of times now and got copious notes on the subject. But again, it's, we have these kind of stereotypical ideas of Chinese, society being communist or collectivist, no individual rights. As a Brit, I've come to understand that America and the United Kingdom are, as the old adage goes, two countries divided by a common language. American culture is very different from the UK culture, even though we speak the same language. And it's an interesting observation. It's easy to make, but again, it's a shift in perceptual position. If you come from a society that values individualistic behaviour and individualistic autonomy very highly, then even looking at a collectivist or communist country, it's going to seem very weird, very strange, very awkward. I'm sure for people from collectivist societies, it's very strange to look upon how individualistic autonomy is a strange thing. Yeah, it's not the right word, but from a collective point of view, it's almost rude to talk about what I will do in this relationship, for example. But it's proper and right and good form to talk about what we can do in this relationship. These are the little things that we pick up on. So I can imagine a business meeting, in a highly individualistic society. We have the meeting, we go around the table. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do the other. In a collectivist society, it might just be, what are we all going to do? And I don't know how. See, I can't even imagine it because I'm deeply rooted in my Western individualistic cultural index. The United Kingdom isn't quite as individualistic as the USA, but it's up there. So when it comes to task allocation, you have to allocate it to somebody. I just can't imagine how it works the other way. Here's some tasks, who wants to do it? But even there, that requires a volunteer of an individual to take responsibility for a section of work. Even that, I suspect, isn't how a collectivist model works. Very, very hard to get out that way of thinking. Just too used to it. I mean, I want to say, imagine you're holding a big barbecue meal or you're having a big party at your house and you say to everybody, it's up to you. See, I can't even get out of it. It's up to us as to what the party's like, and just leave it at that. And then the person who wants to have music will bring music. The person who wants to have drinks will bring some drinks. And it just happens how it happens. And if no one brings drinks, then it obviously wasn't important to have drink. I don't know, I'm just riffing now. But yeah, I mean, these differences in culture, and it can also be manipulated between people as well. This is the us and them thing. I keep making mention of Dave Grossman's book on killing and how to deliberately widen this distance so as to make it easy to kill. So it's, us and them, and then it's not even them, it's an it, and it's not even an it, it's something less than worthy of being alive in the first place. So that's, I think, perceptual positions done to death. So let's move on to the next two categories, verb and object. And so to emphasize this section, I'm going to need to change the example we've been using. I'm going to need something a little bit out of the ordinary, something to catch you off guard. So imagine you fall from the roof. Okay, which are you thinking about most? The falling or the roof? Are you wondering what must have happened for you to have fallen? Or are you imagining what roof, how high, and the distance from the unspecified roof to the unspecified floor? Are you focusing on the verb, or are you focusing on the object? In other words, are you a person of action, or are you all about the things? And what about the case where it's your friend falling from the same roof? How does that change your perspective on it? Are you still thinking about the same thing you were thinking about before? Does that shift what's important about this situation? Are you concerned for your friend's well-being, how they got there, or how high the roof is, or what the roof is, and how they came to be there? Are you thinking of those things in the same order, or does the perspective change the order of what you're thinking about? A more subtle variation of this is the so-called Bible glasses, the God glasses. It works in much the same way as rose-tinted glasses, but to do with giving the Bible preferential treatment. So this is where we might read a passage from the Bible about where it advocates slavery, or is ambivalent, or maybe even encouraging rape, which it has done in a couple of passages. And rather than condemn the book or the ideas or the notion that this is from some divine source, we put the Bible glasses on and say, well, the good book must be correct. It must be me that doesn't understand it. And so the ideas are left unchallenged because we've shifted our perspective of authority. And this is what I find particularly distasteful, is that people have given up their own autonomy, their own logic, their own reasoning just because of the name of this book. But then that's what religion's all about. And as soon as the reader has been convinced or changed their perspective from them being the agency of being able to decide what's true through logic and reason and application of experience, they just default to a different perceptual position, and whatever they read must be true. It's only for them to reconcile how it must be true. It's taken principally as an article of faith first. And then it's not too far a stretch to get into saying things like, well, the lack of evidence is evidence itself, which is the cornerstone of any conspiracy theory. Surely, we've covered this one on the channel by now. People, places and processes. People, architects who like the things and the systems. I'm sure we've made that distinction. We all have different inclinations for these things. It's not a great surprise. Some of us like people and want to interact with other people. Some prefer the serenity and awe of places. And some prefer the most technical aspect of interacting and designing and controlling systems that other people may or may not engage with. So it's expressed when we meet somebody new. After the social graces, we might ask a question. What do you do? Where are you from? How do you do? And what do you do? Or if we're at a bar, we might use a social cue to ask, what will you have? I'm reminded of a scene from a film. I think it was with John Travolta, and it was about, oh gosh, I can't remember whether it was about big tobacco or about local water wells being poisoned. John Travolta plays the part of a lawyer, and he's invited to the private bar of the defence attorneys. And when he sits down, his opposing lawyer asks him, what do you want? And rather than pick up on the social cue of stating the name of the drink, he tells them what he wants is the outcome of the lawsuit, of the settlement. Or if we're in a different culture, we might pick up on the tradition and ceremonial cues and ask different questions according to that context. So, for example, in the United States and the United Kingdom, we are quite consumer-centric. The very phrase retail therapy, although a bit of an inside joke, to admit to self that we are going shopping for things we don't need in the vain hope, there's a hope again, that more things will make us happy. But deep down we know it won't, but it's the best that we can think to do, and it's with the hint embedded that we also think it's as effective as any other therapy. So it expresses an in-between meaning, a kind of cynical and typical metaphorical euphemism. It's also funny, don't you find, when people express things in that way. It was Bertrand Russell who said, the British are distinguished among the nations of modern Europe, on the one hand by the excellence of their philosophers, and on the other hand by their contempt for philosophy, which just about sums it up perfectly. But it's almost like hinted, yeah, I'm going to do this thing, I know it's no good for me, I know it's a waste of money, but just don't ask. just leave me be, I need my therapy. And to get entangled with that or argue against it, you're then having to position yourself as a psychoanalyst, which of course we're not qualified to do unless you happen to be a psychoanalyst, or psycho the rapist as it's spelled. So we never really ask, retail therapy, what specifically are you going to buy at which specific shops, and in what specific way is that therapy? We just leave them alone. Another side note, I suppose, I've been around people who have bragged about how much they've spent on a Hermes scarf, and they are obvious in their need for validation and attention. They'll prance around the office and flap it around in a way that you can't help but notice, but I resist saying something even more strongly. I now feel that they have stamped this imposition into my consciousness, and they're demanding comment on their purchase. Same with friends who've jumped on tables in pubs and clubs to get attention. I feel divided on the subject. While it's not up to me to limit their behaviour, if they want to jump on a table and attract attention, and that's on them. I'm not responsible for that behaviour at all. If they slip on the tabletops because they're full of spilt beer and broken glass, and if they break the tables because that's not what they were designed for and suffer a bad fall, that's on them. But then issues of warning them or dragging them off, provides an interaction. They're almost provoking, like almost demanding an intervention. And I really disliked that in the past, because dragging them from those tabletops gives them even more attention. I just leave them to it. There was one point in my life I used to feel responsible for it. It'd be a club or a pub that I'd go to, and I'd invite his friends, and then they'd do all these things, and it'd be like, this is a little bit on me. But I learned to realise, no, not responsible for other people's actions. And it used to make me nervous as well when friends used to get drunk. Paralytic drunk. I really hated that. I'd have to be that one who took the car keys off them. Once or twice I've saved the people's lives. I remember one time some lunatic got underneath the pool table and started bench pressing it. But the legs were not screwed on. If he'd succeeded in lifting it off the floor, the legs underneath the pool table would have collapsed in, and he would have had a 300-400 pound pool table on his chest. Some people just are not wired or don't get on with the alcohol. It affects them badly. They seem to have a switch in their mind and it goes off. And you can't reason with them, you can't talk them down, they're hell-bent on doing what they want to do, and it's usually self-destructive. Or vandalism. I've been around, again, people got drunk and done vandalism, and it's like, how far do I involve myself in this? Well, I don't know where I should spill the beans, let me see. Destruction of public property, destruction of private property, broken car windows, broken windows on homes. And then there was the smash bottle held against someone's neck, and then there was the issue with the samurai sword that I have to take off somebody. There was the pool table we've already mentioned. There was the drunk driving. Statute of limitations, there was an issue with a gun one time. And a crossbow. Oh, fuck, a crossbow. Oh, boy. Yeah, luckily through all those, though, no one actually got hurt. It's just, I suppose that's my philosophy around it, is let them diffuse by breaking things rather than diffuse by breaking people. And then the next day, inquiries are made and you're in a quandary. Do you grass people up, or because it can lead to some awkward conversations, and then it can lead to, well, does this person actually need to be put in therapy for this? And that's between them and, well, again, you see, it's dragging me into their world where I don't want to be. But I feel that if I hadn't involved, they might have taken it out on people rather than things. But it is an interesting observation to make that most of those people and most of those incidents were actually remembered by the people who did them the next day. They very well knew what they were doing, even though they were high or drunk. So I reasoned it was up to their conscience as to whether they confessed and made reparations for damage. And I sometimes wonder, naively I wonder, about the patriotic, and I mean patriotic in its truest sense, not this national jingoistic imperialism, but from a very real and justified position of providing a kind of sense of security and service. Sometimes I wonder why these professionals do it when the citizenry seems so batshit crazy, so hell-bent on doing the most idiotic and self-harming of things. I have to wonder, is this what we're protecting sometimes? I wonder if this causes a schism in and of itself, that the professional services do look at this and go, why am I doing this? All right, let me just do what I do and not get involved and let the lunatics be lunatics. So it's one thing to comment on someone's scarf. if it has complementary effects to their ensemble, can make a compliment about their style. But if it actually looks horrendous on them, it's best not to say anything. It's another to make comment when the invitation is insisted upon. Again, by responding, I feel I'm enabling because they've just spent $200 to get a compliment from a stranger about some epoxy scarf. I wonder if it encourages them to go and buy another one. But then again, how far do you get involved? Why shouldn't I just pay them compliments every day then so that they don't have to buy a scarf to get it? But then again, that's dragging me into their need for validation. Dilemma. People I never understand. Likewise, soldiers, I wonder if it's occurred to them that they're enabling all sorts of bad behaviours. They're making it too easy on the citizenry and taking responsibility away from them. Best just keep myself and others to ourselves and not concern ourselves if people buy scarves, dance on slippery, rickety tables with spilt beer or otherwise. Just sigh and move on, leave them to it. Anyway, the point, yes, things in the West, we seek things in the West to make ourselves happy. That's the consumerism. It's been indoctrinated for, a good 100 years or so now. And it's an illusion of inappropriate associations. It seems pervasive. I've noticed people, even top-level executives in marketing departments who you would think have worked this out, have defaulted to this delinquent model. What model is the one by association? Not necessarily correlation or not even causation, but merely an association. So, once upon a time, somebody bought a scarf and got a compliment, and that felt good, and now they're all out buying scarves to get compliments. There's an association there, but there's no causal relation. It doesn't mean that if someone buys a scarf, it guarantees a compliment. There's merely an association that once upon a time it happened, and now it drives their behaviour because they have a belief about this association. You've seen it. It's everywhere. Look at any commercial on television. They can't explicitly say, hey, you there, hey, you. If you smoke our cigarettes, you get to date the most beautiful of people. Hey, you there. Drive this sexy car, and the man or woman of your dreams will want to fuck you endlessly. It's actually better left understated, or not said at all, as the consumer will actually fill in the blanks with their own desires and will make appropriate associations, especially when not explicitly stated, because then there's nothing to disagree with. So you just show the picture of the car and the topless man, scantily clad woman, and you let the viewer, the looker, the voyeur, fill in their own association. It's come so far now. The flash cars, the perfume. I love the perfume ads, the high concept, almost artsy-fartsy Christmas ads for perfumes. There wasn't so many this year, but I love them. Tokens of aspirations have themselves become the things of desire rather than the means through which our desires could be met. In a way, it's cheapened life so much. Once upon a time, do you remember the milk tray adverts? All because the lady loves milk tray, and it was like some understated hero in black, and it was the idea of being a hero. But now, it's about having the exclusive box of chocolates. It's not even about aspirations of being something amazing or great or that mysterious aspiration of whatever. Now it's actually about owning the thing rather than what it used to be associated with the aspiration. Not so long ago we wanted, can I still say, are you still on board? We wanted the big house, the flash car to get us to some nirvana. And now those things are the nirvana. Things. People, a means to get things, rather than things, a means by which our interpersonal relationships can develop and flourish. I presume through such a naive and novel notions of sharing common interest in things, it seems to have flipped now, rather than, like I say, have things and common interests that develop relationships with other people. The thing itself is now the object of desire, and that's what I'm trying to get to. This SVO model again. And like I said before, which is more important? The dog chased a cat, or the cat was chased by a dog? Well, it depends whether you're a cat person or a dog person. What's more important? The things or the object, or, the verb, thing, the subject, the verb, the object? Which are you picking out and paying attention to in spoken sentences? What are we conditioned to listen out for? So I wonder if we can see that we are actually inside these bias bubbles now, and these propaganda packets. And in this, the emphasis and importance of our language itself is kind of corroded. That the model of the SVO construct now has its emphasis on the object rather than the verb. Like I say, we're all about the consumerism here in the West and the things and getting the McMansion and getting the Lambo in the garage. That is, it becomes more important about where we go cycling, in what clothes, with what model of bike, rather than the other bit. The actual experience, the action, the doing of cycling. So now we can flesh out this table a bit more. And so, we've got the SVO, we've done the subject a little bit, the I, we, you, us and them thing. And in the verb column, we can now add the activities. And in the object column, we can talk about the things, the places, the objects. I offer further data in support of the claim that we are now moving more towards object worship and objectification, with the notion that we even say things like, I want to get into a good relationship. It nominalizes the experience and transforms an action, a doing, an experience. It transforms it into an object itself. So many times on the channel I've made reference to I being the biggest nominalization of them all. It's to turn self, one's thoughts, interactions, preferences, life experience, which is always in motion, a dynamic human being, into a fixed object and call it I. And I infers a static, fixed object. So again, in regard to data, by the way, where does that belong to which category? Things or actions or something else? So the point I'm trying to make is that book contains information, but it's not the information itself. Is the information what is residue in the mind of the reader? Perhaps it can be even described as an arrangement of neural clusters, but the neural clusters themselves are not the information. So where is the actual information? Or is the information an emergent phenomenon? Again, like Waitzkin described in his Art of Learning, it requires two to tango. There's no teacher without a learner, and no learner without a teacher. The meaning of information is the result of an interaction. And this interaction is now describing the cybernetic systems. Cybernetics, must get onto that. Suffice to say, it strikes me that these interactions are limited and constrained by what we already know to do or say. The learner can't ask questions about things that they don't know yet about what or how to ask. And the teacher can't know what to teach until they know what the student does know and what they don't know. Otherwise, they're just repeating to the learner what they already know, and that's not teaching. No, it's easier with small kids and toddlers because they don't know anything. But I've also found going to seminars as well is problematic because they promise the world, you get there and you've heard it all before. But when you actually ask what you're going to learn on a seminar, they tell you a lie. Oh, new stuff. Okay, it might be new for them, but it might not be new for me. Perhaps it's clear here also that since this is an interaction, and one doesn't happen without the other then, having the notion that my point of view is more important is quite self-centered, obviously. And this is what I'm trying to get through, is that these are the positions and perceptual positions we automatically assume. We assume our mind, our body of knowledge, our experience is the most important one in the room, perhaps simply because we just don't know about other people's experiences and knowledge and understanding of things. This self-centeredness, though, we almost insist on it. Am I still okay to say we? I have to check in now that I've made it explicit. But don't you find that the people who you like talking to the most are the ones who let you go first? I think we covered this off in the motivational interview series. And though such people are rare, even rarer are the ones who seem especially tuned into your model of importance. They pick up on your order of things, whether you express the S, the V, or the O the most. It's in your tone of voice, it's in what you speak of, it's how you phrase things in terms of I and we, and whether you emphasize the objects or the verbs. There are a small number of people who are really tuned into listening for these things and respond to it in very positive ways. Again, I can't help but think about this woman who used to buy the Hermes scarves. She'd drop hints. I went down to the Hermes store today, and then she'd brush a scarf or flash it across the back of her neck or something. And I couldn't help but think, do you want me to stare at the scarf or do you want me to stare at you? Which are you directing attention to? Do you want me to appreciate the scarf for what it is, Or do you want me to appreciate you for having bought it? Or is it the combination? Or is it your sense of style that you want me to validate? I was always confused about what they were asking for. But again, it seemed impolite and rude to ask the question directly. Excuse me, I couldn't help notice that you're seeking some form of validation, but it's not clear to me which it is. Are you asking me to validate the production quality of the Hermes scarf, or justify its expense, or note how it matches the rest of your ensemble, or is it that you actually want me to look at you and pay attention to you, and you've made an association that wearing a scarf gets you the attention? Is this the attention you were seeking, me asking stupid questions? No. Yeah, so let's bring it back. Let me just close out with an example then. So, I went to the pub last night and drank some tasty beer with Jack. Kind of statement of fact. I went to the pub last night and drank some tasty beer with Jack. I went to the pub last night and drank some tasty beer with Jack. I went to the pub last night and drank some tasty beer with Jack. You can tell what's being emphasised. So when people speak to me, I have my own anxieties and desire to fill in the picture so that I can get a sense of what they're meaning. And I really dislike it when they only explicitly mention 2 out of the 3 SV and Os. And then I feel like I have to override their story and interrupt and ask for clarification about who they were with or where they were or what they were doing, whichever one's been missed out, to complete the picture. What I should do is listen to which ones they're emphasising and just ask them about that. So I went to the pub last night and drank some beer. Now, I have to know alone or who with to kind of complete the picture, but what I should just do is, and if if we're ambiguous about which was important, we can say, well, tell me about that. It doesn't matter to us. We don't need a complete picture of what they were doing. If it was important to them, they would have told us, so we can dismiss that bit. It's not important. It might be later. It might be a piece of information that they're holding back for a deliberate reason, but, maybe we want to fish it out, maybe we don't. But I suppose we should emphasise on what they are interested in, because that's what matters to them. Are we really interested that they went to the pub last night with someone? No. But are we actually interested in them as a human being? Yes. So are we focusing on the scarf or the human being wearing it? So yeah, knowing this then, it gives us a strong inclination, not just on the surface level stuff. A friend went to the pub last night and drank beer with a friend, but out of those we can get a feel for which of those is more important to the speaker. This is meta-information. It's information about information. Something I hope to get back to later with, again, continuing ontology, semantics, and the semantic web, and perhaps I can even get to artificial intelligence and deep learning. But we can go further, and we can get to information on information about information. And there's so many levels to this. So as well as working out which of the SVOs is important to the person about what they're expressing, we can also find out about their time, space, and motivation direction in relation to those SVOs. So those who liked the past, enjoyed the past, talk of the past, and share their past, and may even want the past to be now again. And we might call these people traditionalists. So last time we mentioned risk, and change brings risk. And it seems to me the older we get, the less risk we seek on average, and become more conservative generally. We recognise we're less able to do the things we could in our prime and have less time to make up for any mistakes. And it's another observation that on average people tend to do what they know how to do, and as we get older we have more experience and information about the things that we know how to do. We become quite specialist in certain fields, and we tend to do the things we know how to do. We always go to what's familiar, on average, and some nutcases out there always go for the stuff they don't know about. It seems then as we get older we know more about doing the things that we know how to do, and if that's taken 30 years, it's a shorter 30 years from the age of 20 to 50 than it is from 60 to 90. So, at this point I'll raise concerns of anxiety. It surely is a way to reduce anxiety to do the things that worked in the past. Whether that's actually a good predictable model for how to handle things of now and changes of the future may or may not be, but the point is it brings comfort and gives us a sense of confidence that because it worked in the past, it'll work again, so we're more apt to do it. But if we actually realise the truth that that's just a delusion, we might think twice. So it's not without anxiety that we do something totally different. Yet the world changes, and so do people. It's one of those nuanced things. We do the same things we are familiar with, but in each iteration there is noise in the process, slight differences, and we modify. Yet the change might be so small on each occasion that we don't realise that small things have actually changed. So our perception is of doing the same old thing, but it's slightly different every time, but we don't realise the change and we perceive it as being the same as it always was. We kind of like hoodwinked ourselves because the changes in each iteration have been so small. But when the change is big enough to perceive that a change has occurred, we suddenly become aware of it. The metaphor, is the frog in the pan of boiling water, put it in cold water, heat it up, and the frog doesn't notice, and it boils to death. I think that really is just a metaphor. The frog does actually jump out when the temperature gets too hot. The frog, it seems, has good sense. And now on the other side, people who bring new ideas and new ways and advocate for massive changes, progressives, that's one thing. But violent revolution is another. And speaking of violent revolution, I'm reminded of the Red Brigade. The Red Brigade was active in Italy during the 1970s and 80s, and their actions obviously made the nightly news. And this was noticed by Ruggero Deodato. If you know, you know. And if you don't, he was a film director, and he made an infamous film called, among other films, this particular one was called Cannibal Holocaust. Banned in 40 countries, and by the way, censorship is an interesting subject in of itself. Must come back to that one time. But the filmmakers and producers of Cannibal Holocaust were prosecuted for obscenity, prosecuted for murder, animal cruelty, all sorts. Animals were killed for the purposes of making the film, and even the cast, it seems, were treated quite badly. It was proper exploitation all round. The prosecutions and rumours about the film production led to the speculation that some of the on-screen deaths were actually real. And of course this created outrage, publicity. Just to clear this up, this did not happen. The producer had contracts with the cast that they would not appear in any other films or any other publicity or promotions or marketing or advertising material for at least a year after the release of this film, so that the director could create that illusion. Now, what's funny, and it'll be apparent in a moment why it's funny, but this ruse worked too well, and as I say, landed him in court with murder charges against him. Now, I do happen to like the grindhouse exploitation films. There's something so honest about them. It holds the mirror up. The few cannibal films I've watched, they always seem to start in a metropolitan area, a setting like New York. And during the first 15 minutes of the film, the crew, the reporters, the investigators, the young filmmakers end up in some remote location. And it's often the story that the cannibals, the savages, are merely enacting violence in kind against the metropolitan or so-called sophisticated persons who actually, through ignorance, accident or assumption, do damage to the tribe in the first place. And this is what I say about the exploitation films. It's so honest that, for example, we have this group of outsiders, the people from the big city. They happen to fly into a remote location and through accident or ignorance do a damage to the tribe. And when the tribe responds in kind, the metropolitan intruders label the tribe as savages and cannibals when they fail to see they're actually describing themselves. And I think that's the point of these films, and that's why I think it's funny. It was funny that the director of the film, who tried to point out this sophisticated meta-narrative, actually ends up in court on murder charges. The courts having bought into the hype and propaganda. It just epitomises the film so perfectly that it's just delicious irony. It's just wonderful. So why am I talking about cannibal films and exploitation now? Because these films too are a meta commentary. We have a director of exploitation films pointing out how exploitative so-called Western and sophisticated society is, except we don't see our violent nature because it's wrapped up in euphemisms, business speak, corporate language, assumptions and biases that we all share that go unchallenged because we're in that bubble. So these films are a sort of social commentary on Western ignorance, and ignorance in respect of we believe the stereotypes, we're believing the hype, we're believing the propaganda over what's actually real, And we prefer the illusion to the reality. And it goes so far that the film censors banned films because they thought it was real, that the courts tried to prosecute murder because they fell for the hype too, that people took these films seriously. What was a joke, and the joke was that people will take this seriously, so let's make it more outrageous, which was taken seriously. It kind of confirmed the rank hypocrisy and the delusion and the acknowledgement that the stereotypes carry so much more weight than actual evidence. So the point of all this was to make mention that Deodato noticed that during the violent period of the Red Brigade, the media and the news focused on sensationalizing the acts of violence rather than analysing the underlying conditions, the reason why the violence was occurring. Again, see, the news is focusing on the waving of the scarf rather than the human being wearing it. So the parallels between this and Deodato's cannibal films, they just really tickle me. It's funny. On the one hand, it's a failure of journalistic integrity for sensationalism, and that sensationalism is an exaggeration of preconceived biases, opinions and beliefs that feeds right back into the outrage at those stereotypes and exaggerations and preconceived biases. It's not really real, but the hype machine recycles those cliches and stereotypes. Like I said right at the beginning of this, we have these well-worn phrases that we say to each other rather than not saying anything at all. You can't sell a newspaper that doesn't have any ink on it. This point is explicitly pointed out in the film. Let me play a little clip. I don't usually like to do this on the channel, copyright.
I don't think exceptional is the right word.
You don't?
No. I mean, what's exceptional about a primitive tribe like the Yakumo being terrorized and forced into doing something that they don't normally do?
Come on now, Professor. Let's be realistic. Who knows anything about the Yakumo civilization? Today, people want sensationalism. The more you rape their senses, the happier they are.
Ah, yes, that's typical Western thought. Civilized, isn't it? That's what Alan thought, and that's why he's dead.
Yeah, so there you have it. And I single out Cannibal Holocaust because, apart from the title of the film, it starts in a rather innocuous manner. And to use the phrase, it does subvert expectations, but it does it properly. It is a film about media deception and how perspectives can change depending on context. The Rashomon effect we mentioned before, which is what we're talking about here. We think we know. We think our perspective is the right one. We think our perspective is the most important. And that can slide into arrogance and presuming to see fit to impose our so-called Western ways onto others. Buy more shit. And I mentioned this also in some of the audios on ethics, consequentialism, utilitarianism. Why is it that we think that our preferences should be given priority to anybody else's preferences? What's the justification? The example I gave was in animal rights. While I agree, human life is more important than, say, a creature or a living thing that's not a human, it's a hard one to actually justify with any strong argument. We just know. So Cannibal Holocaust is thick with portraying over-the-top arrogance, but what's amusing is the parody can be taken at face value, which in a delicious way reveals that people who miss this are not as sophisticated as they thought. They are that tribe that they're criticising, and will no doubt react quite violently against the film, which happened, which is beautiful. The savages expose themselves while maintaining their insistence on being right and being the imposers of moral virtue and being the sophisticated ones that have merit to make such judgments about these things, which is exactly what the film is about. Very clever. To give the game away, it's not good. Go on, if you can get hold of it, go and watch it. And watch it with this point of view, it'll make sense. So to give the game away, the film is about a documentary team who go to the Amazon to document the cannibal tribe. It's already presumed. And the crew does some pretty despicable things to contrive reactions from the tribe, and then they film them. However, knowing this, the executives behind the film crew are unfazed by these tactics and simply want to show the compelling televisions and compelling documentaries. So sure, the horrific things in the film happened, but they were contrived by the film crew's interference. But the contrivances are edited out and only show the tribe's reactions, which are used to portray their savagery. If you frequent the so-called blogosphere, you've no doubt heard that the big tech and the lefty soy boys of San Francisco are using their big tech platforms to persecute and discriminate against conservatism. Same thing. Made all the more ironic by the fact that conservative media has a lot more financial backing than the left media. In the extreme form, where white supremacists are to be found, they will insist, of course, they are not racists, but will quite happily advocate for the country they are in to be made into a white ethno-state, but won't use the word genocide. Again, the parallels to the Cannibal Holocaust are not lost on me, and now I think about it, if we replace the title of the film with Consumer Holocaust, where we are eating ourselves with endless consumerism on the presumption of infinite growth, which is a lie we ignore and don't think about, it could well end in a Holocaust. So how does the film end? Well, it ends with a meeting back in the News Corporation's headquarters in New York, where there is a test screening of the documentary, and the executives are walking out, not in disdain. The screenings end and they're all like leaving the theatre that they've just watched this documentary in, and then the decision is made. The executives order the footage destroyed. So the truth isn't so much buried as simply not told. It's forgotten, or as Rick Sanchez advised us, best not to think about it. And so while I recognise Rick and Morty is fictional, as is Cannibal Holocaust, it is written by people very good at telling stories and conveying meaning through metaphor of film or cartoons. It's a matter of shifting perspective. It's what I'm trying to get to. There's no good reason. There's no bad reason. There is the why, our values, our justifications from our point of view. We respond to our internal representations of the world, much more so to the world itself. So there was a study done in 2016, what the mouse eye tells the mouse brain. This suggests strong evidence that shows image processing in the mind actually happens in the eye, as well as the brain. This is a follow-on from a former paper published in 1959 called What the Frog's Eyes Tells the Frog's Brain. Interestingly, the 2016 study used machine learning techniques, and if I'm reading it right, it seems that there are different ganglion cells that react to different properties of light and images, and the axons from these cells in the eye segregate in the optic nerve and continue all the way to the neural pathways in the visual cortex. That is to say, the optic nerve and the ganglion cells in the eye, one way to look at it, is that these are actually still part of the brain. The different types of ganglion cells have diverse functions: contrast detection, edge detection, movement detection, direction and colour, and other things too. And it's reckoned there are around 40 different types of ganglion cells performing these different functions, certainly within the study of mice. And being mammals, it's reckoned that humans have a similar structure. Lots of research still going on, but yeah, we're not even seeing the real world firsthand. So it seems frogs have their uses outside of pans of boiling water. Apparently, they only strike moving insects. Still, dead ones are not apparently detected. It's reckoned that the frog responds only to moving dark objects, not even just flies, as many a YouTube video demonstrates, where they put a mobile phone in front of a frog and the mobile phone has a video of dark moving objects. The frog strikes out at them. But the investigation is whether it's the frog's eye that detects the small dark patches of movement that triggers the brain that then decides to strike or not. It's not like, I'm hungry, let me go and see if I can find some insects. It's that the movement of the dark, small shapes triggers the brain, and that occurs first. So I suppose, the analogy for humans is similar in the sense that monkey see, monkey do. We see something, or otherwise get a stimulus, and then we respond according to the model of the world that we have, and we react. And our model of the world is updated on the outcome of the reaction. Constant state of flux, and this is what I say about being cautious in nominalizing I. I isn't static, it's dynamic. Hence, change perception, change internal model, change response. So far, so good. The last little discussion, by the way, is more fully described in correspondence theory, which is above my pay grade. Suffice to say, the main argument is provided by Descartes, who stated this roughly as: truth is that which denotes the conformity of thought with its object. Kant said similar, the agreement of cognition with its object is nominally the truth. So for our discussion, this is related insofar as our behaviour is driven by our perceptions of reality, and perhaps to some, it's important for our perceptions, our cognition, our thoughts to be as close to the object, reality if you like, as is necessary. It seems to me the wider this gap, the more fantastical our hopes. And poor thinking robs us of time on the altar of hope. Week to week, we go by suffering in silence with only the hope of winning the lottery, keeping us hopeful of a future. It's made worse by the misinformed notion that we shall either win this week or not win this week, but in the odds, therefore, of success at 50-50. We talked about this skewed notion of stats before, but alas, it has been used in the most deliberate and wicked ways to dupe us. Of internet infamy, mocked, there was a film made a long time ago called Athletes for Abstinence. It ain't worth it. The title says it all. Repeated claims are made that those who partake in unprotected sex have a 50-50 chance of adverse effects, 50-50 chance of getting HIV, 50-50 chance of getting gonorrhea, 50-50 chance of getting syphilis or of getting pregnant. Each case is examined and described in horrible detail. The rashes, the boils, the weeping genitals. Let's put it that. I'm not into wet ass pussies here, but actually a weeping gusset. Moving on. Anyway, this seems to be based on the notion that these things will either happen or they will not happen, and therefore the probability is wrongly pegged at 50-50. But this video nasty does a lot of damage by installing fear into the most natural of acts. Sure, be safe, be sensible, enjoy yourself, but this lying for Jesus thing, again, it's using fear to drive behaviour that we want other people to do that's no concern of ours. But for some reason, people have such hang-ups and anxieties about how other people live their life. There is that thread again, it's only when you absorb these media productions, saturate with the descriptions of Charles Manson and the JamesTown cult, that common themes arise. There is a self-centered sociopathic tendency. We've talked about Manson on the channel before in the early episodes, that in his early childhood, because he didn't get Christmas presents, he would destroy all of his friends' Christmas presents, and in doing so, rather than absorb the inequity, due largely to his unfortunate early circumstances of having horrible parents, and I presume his parents and guardians were unable or unwilling to be motivated to redress this issue, Charles Manson took matters into his own hands to even the playing field. So by destroying all of his friends' Christmas presents, no one got Christmas presents. That's equitable. Same with the JamesTown disaster, and I suspect the Waco thing. From one point of view, what seemed to precipitate the Waco disaster was that the authorities insist that Koresh, whose wish was to be left alone, was apparently not acceptable. I even saw one of the FBI negotiators say that in a seminar on negotiation. A member of the audience asked what were Koresh's demands, and the FBI lecturer shot back to be left alone. I would have hoped that he would have qualified that demand a bit more and given reasons as to why Koresh couldn't be left alone. So while we can see a bit of an absurdity and an apparent injustice, there are those who want to be left alone, to form sex cults and engage in child rape and murder, so clearly they can't be left alone. And the JamesTown, I might come back to that, because the notion of the cult centered around articles of faith steers directly into belief systems, which is what we're talking about here. However, in summary, the cult leader Jim Jones showed similar signs of being aggrieved by these perceived injustices. He moved to Guyana to be left alone, and when the United States sent NBC and a congressman to investigate Jim Jones, he knew what was coming. He knew that he wouldn't be left alone. So there was a long drawn-out battle, which he knew it would be a long drawn-out battle, which ultimately he knew he would not win. And this is the thing, Anyway, so Jim Jones, he provoked, and he had the congressman and news people and a few defectors killed. He knew that this act would not go unretaliated, so he accelerated an otherwise long drawn-out battle. So he did it on his terms, even though he knew he was going to lose. He chose to lose on his terms, which meant taking out all these people, which I suspect he used as a justification then for checking out the cult, with what shall we call it, strongly urged self-termination of life, and in some cases enforced termination of life, i.e. murder. I mean, it's complicated, but in summary, it was murder framed as a mass suicide. But in doing this, he tried to put the blood of this on the hands of the authorities intervening in his paradise. See, what he's basically saying, had you not come, this would not have happened. Had you left me alone, these people would still be alive. See, had you not given other children Christmas presents and created an inequality, I would not have had to have destroyed those other kids' presents and ruined their lives. So it's your fault for creating that inequality. It's your fault for not leaving me alone. Same with the athletes who are abstinence. And I suspect it's because, the people in the video are not getting any because they're scared of it, apprehensive to it, or they've been rejected just a little bit too often. Because my mum and dad fucked me up with religion, then you are going to have to suffer the same fate, or it's just not fair. And because I can't get over my fears and anxieties, that means I'm going to have to make it so that you can't. So here it is. 50-50 chance of getting AIDS every time you have sex. 50-50 chance of getting pregnant every time you have sex. And so they make, I suspect it's a really Machiavellian, psychotic way of trying to level the playing field. If I have to go through life full of fear and anxiety, it's not fair that you don't, so let me make it so that you do. I suppose the points we've made about beliefs, cults, religion, and a little bit on the politics, the anxiety of change and how the conservatives want things as they were back in the 50s and 60s, and the progressives want to change the legacies of the institutions of the 50s and 60s that hold us back, can be described, or is what is currently referred to as the culture war. I mean, it's not really, but it's maybe worth a mention. You've heard of cancel culture and how Christmas is being cancelled, has been for the last 5-10 years as far as I can tell. And it's all rubbish. It goes like this. Someone somewhere says Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. And someone with deep-seated anxieties is worried that they will be castigated for uttering the very phrase Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. In reality, no one gives a shit. Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas. It's the intent of the good wish that matters. See, this is what I was referring to earlier. The SVO model. What's being emphasised? The thing, Christmas, its form and tradition, or the meaning and experience that people have around the time of Christmas and their intentions to share and wish you good tidings and good things and happiness and joy. Merry Christmas. What's being focused on? The thing or the action of experience. Then the person who sees this modern change, Happy Holidays, and the slightest deviation from the script or dogma, they then lose their mind and they try to reinforce the old ways and insist that anyone who doesn't say Merry Christmas, regardless of intent, is some lefty, communist, Leninist, cultural Marxist. So whenever a guy like Harry Styles, who recently wore a dress, holy shit, only women and girls can wear dresses, therefore this is an attack on traditional family values, and the nuclear family is being attacked by the regressive left, who want to bring about the Marxist apocalypse. As if a man wearing a dress brings about the Marxist apocalypse. But this is how they paint it. The culture war isn't really a thing. It's an imaginary phantom created by frightened minds, overdosed on anxiety, and I suspect by those who want to maintain power structures and institutions that have made them quite wealthy. But they can't be honest and say, hey, all these changes and breakdowns of traditional norms that have made me rich are being eroded and I don't like that because it's going to make me poor. No, they have to dress it up in a way that threatens what it is that people perceive as having value. People value Christmas. People value words and the meaning of words and the tradition of words. So when someone stirs the hornet's nest by saying, people saying Happy Holidays is a war on Christmas, it triggers people because it presents then a threat to something that's valued. The same way that, you are going to be forced to use people's pronouns or go to jail. That's perceived as a war on your free speech. And this hasn't happened. Likewise, the frenzy that Jordan Peterson stirred up with the Canadian Bill C-16, all his worries and fears and threats and promises about how bad that would be, haven't come to pass. On the surface level, it's petty, but look deeper and it's the wealth exploited by use of stereotypes and enforcing people into a status quo that creates a inequity that the rich can extract from. And if we are right that risk is that where an event or some imagined scenario threatens things we value, we might be justified in thinking that people react to this. they'll react very quickly. And people who stand to lose fortunes by the changing of the status quo will do this reactionary bit. Oh, it's a war on Christmas. Oh, it's a war on free speech. Oh, it's toxic masculinity and all that gender bender crap. There's this reactionary bullshit to the new progressive ideas that might just seek to redistribute some of that wealth gained by exploiting legacy institutions, legacy beliefs, unfair and unjust and biased laws and policies, like the legacies of redlining and financial ostracization, inability to access certain healthcare, be able to afford certain foods and get access to certain education because of where you live in a low income area, in an area of poverty, and there's no mobility for that class of people. It helps people stay rich. Poverty is required for capitalism because when you're in poverty, you're desperate. You'll take any old piece of shit you can get hold of or starve to death. It's up to you. So it keeps labour prices low. God forbid we bring in any progressive ideas about minimum wages or UBI. Oh no, we can't have that. Same for religions. Point out to young children that there is no good evidence to justify belief in a God, and the believers lose their shit. Which reveals the hypocrisy, by the way, because that faith is the belief in things unseen. It's the belief in things without evidence. But point this out to a child and you can see the twitch in the believer's eyes. They know that once that seed of doubt is planted in a young child and they are endowed with their own critical thinking skills, and that the child now knows to ask for evidence before taking on substantial beliefs, the religion has now lost that child. Again, the kind of default status quo is upset by this new progressive critical thinking thing. Education. Oh, we can't have that. And speaking of which, there are some concerning stories about education. Let me read this one from the Texas Board of Education. I can't do it in a Texan accent, but it says, "We oppose the teaching of higher order thinking skills, critical thinking skills, and similar programs that are simply relabeling of outcome-based education, which focuses on behavior modification and have the purpose of challenging the students' fixed beliefs and undermining parental authority." And I think it's the Texas Board of Education have just voted to reject a proposal that would allow experts to fact-check textbooks that are going to be used in the classroom before they're actually approved for use. This reeks of that similar ploy that's going on in Hungary right now. The play on ousting gays. First redefine terms and then make legislation based on those redefinitions of terms. And these are the same groups I found that exercise outrage when someone says happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas and makes a big deal out of it into some claim about words being redefined, yet they're the ones who are at it all the frickin' time. And to add insult to injury, this malarkey on not teaching critical thinking is justified because critical thinking is classified in something called outcome-based education. And opponents say this outcome-based education stifles critical thinking. Yeah, get your head around that. What they're saying is that they oppose teaching critical thinking skills because it stifles critical thinking. Whatever. But that's obviously stupid, and people spot that, so they kind of use this tokenized outcome-based education as the target for attack, and they put critical thinking in there, but it's not about critical thinking anymore. It's about OBE, which includes critical thinking, which has now become a synonym for critical thinking. And so OBE actually takes the hit because they've swapped out a different title or a different token to attack. Again, redefining of things makes it complicated to keep track of what's going on. I'm losing my mind trying to work all this through. Story goes deeper. OBE, outcome-based education, was rolled out in the US in the early 90s, and it represented change, and there was anxiety about that and resistance, and I suspect this is where this mess comes from. A tenuous link, it seems, has been made with OBE and critical thinking, but these are not the same categories of things. And because of this controversy, blown way out of proportion, actually not a controversy at all, again, likely stoked up by traditionalists who resist the change, modern educators are reticent to even mention the phrase OBE or outcome-based education. So, they kind of get in the way. So while the Texas GOP did state it rejected critical thinking, it was within the context of outcome-based education, for what that's worth. But again, I suspect yet another layer of smoke and mirrors. It does seem there is a movement driven by the extreme religious right to stifle the teaching of critical thinking skills to young children, because to do otherwise isn't fair. We can't indoctrinate children who think critically. Lessons are then censored, the classroom is politicized, and propaganda is taught instead, and young children are indoctrinated against being taught evolution, and some children are prepped by the parents as well to ask disruptive questions in science classes. You know, those lefty, satanic, Marxist, liberal, sciencey types. We can't have them teaching critical thinking skills to children. God, they might make their own mind up about something. However, if the religious zealots get their own way, once the students' curiosity is suppressed and they are taught to default to authority, well, then religion is free to be preached from the classroom. Only then can they let the impressionable young people make up their own minds. See, it's the same grift. Redefine terms, set the rules, remove the truth, and then let the children decide for themselves what they've been told they better believe or burn in hell. And I've laboured this one, of course, because we're talking about beliefs, and religion is make-believe. And here's the punchline. It's a lot easier to make-believe when everyone else is make-believing at the same time. Yeah, again, thinking back to Charles Manson, those levels of delusion. If you're the only one that believes this stuff, it makes you delusional. But if everyone else has been conned to believe the same delusion, well, that's called religion. Or if religion is too hot a word, then let's use culture instead. My faith culture. Because religion's now a dirty word, so they use this, it's my culture. You're attacking my cultural heritage by not allowing me to indoctrinate children. Back to the culture war. Yes, now the war on Christmas makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? We can see it for what it is now. The dogma, the cult requires new members as churn rates increase. So members are encouraged to spread their religion, to propagate their culture by insisting on mandated language. It's Merry Christmas. Marriage is between a man and a woman. It's saying have a blessed day at the end of every conversation. But pull them up on this, and they use plausible deniability and maintain they are just being nice. Of course they get weirded out when a Satanist might retort, may the devil make a Satan himself, Beelzebub install within them a streak of temptation such that they do one act a day that is wicked, that brings them much joy. Yeah, us secularist peeps are not dicks like that. Now the rabbit hole goes deeper. Oh, fuck, this shit is endless. Blessings, then, are akin to level uppers. Utility multipliers and curses are the opposite. So, think of having a blessed set of golf clubs that, lower the overall score of a golfer, but cursing your competitors' clubs such that their score goes up. In other words, blessings, to be blessed, to have blessings, makes life easier, and it's evidence that you are one of the chosen ones. Curses make it harder. Now, I understand once upon a time you used to be able to pay for someone to cast curses or blessings. In many belief systems, the curse itself is considered to have some causative force in the result. It's a belief about causes. To reverse or eliminate a curse is sometimes called removal or breaking the spell, and often requires elaborate rituals, prayers, or fees, or nasty, horrible tasks that are sometimes worse than the curse. But again, it's such a weird human bias, that medicine has to taste bad for it to be effective. If medicine tastes good, how can it possibly work? If a curse is lifted so easily, then is it really a curse in the first place? So to maintain the illusion, to lift the curse, you have to do this trial or pay this penance or offer this fee or do this elaborate ritual that actually takes twice as long and is more painful than the actual result of the curse anyway. And we would rather do that because now at least we're in control of the bad outcome rather than leaving some mysterious or unforeseen or unknowable bad outcome for which we know we have been cursed. Again, it's a control thing. It's a reduction of anxiety. Either way, it requires, as its core belief, that curses and hexes and jinxes are real things. So, the modern twist is palm reading, fortune telling, clairvoyance, and other bloody witchcraft woo-woo, shitty chakra crap. Again, it seems to be a concern with settlement of anxiety. I admit, I used to read the the daily Stargazer in the back of the newspapers, the daily astrology report when I was working in food factories. It did make life more bearable. It's just nice to read a sentence or two that says, this is for this section of people, you're one of them. So the identification is strong. And then you say, life isn't going to be all bad. It's going to turn around soon. Gives you hope enough just to keep going. It seems to me, that's a bit like what psychotherapy is. Anyway. Yeah, positive or negative enchantments. Pain or gain. Move towards, move away. Are you comfortable with ambivalence and the unknown, or do you need stability and certainty? Where's your trade-off point? And this seems to be the challenge of life. You're always exchanging time value for risk. There are plenty of people who've got things to sell us that play on our values and motivations and preferences for life choice. Now, I started this episode off by saying this is going to be an episode about beliefs and learning is best done in a jovial atmosphere, and I've thrown in a few little ditties and one-liners here and there. So learning seems to be easiest when it is fun, positive. And here we can learn from rewards, or we can learn from pain, our pains, our mistakes. And most people, it seems, insist on learning from pain and are condemned to live lives of big mistakes. But wouldn't it be better to live a life of success based on reward learning? Just think of those rewards. Maybe it's money, maybe it's love, maybe it's fun, maybe it's intellectual pursuits, whatever that is for you. If you're interested in knowing how to do this, click here to learn more. And that's how it's done. I hope you caught on there. Yeah, selling into your values, leveraged off black and white dichotomy of blessed and cursed, which was conflated into learning with pain and gain, and appealed to your own rewards, whatever you imagine. So there is a little bit of correspondence theory in here. In these examples, though, the persons are making very profound decisions from a very distorted reality. Well, actually, it might not be the way the majority of people organise their internal model of reality, let's put it that way. So science, then, is the rigorous testing of this correspondence. Does the model reliably comport to reality? Does the model make predictions that are accurate, specific and reliable? And if so, to what level of accuracy, under what conditions, and with what level of reliability? Stuff we'll get back into. It's the difference between asking, how do I fit in with reality? And how can reality be brought to how I am? As I cue up that George Bernard Shaw quote about mad men change. Okay, so I'm breaking into my own video here and I'm inserting the section on Trump's call that's just made the world headlines. So there's going to be a marked difference in audio quality to signify where this insert starts and ends, and after this little insert I'll say, okay, back to where we were before, something like that. So the call is an hour long, perhaps you've already heard it, but it's full of beliefs, associations, correlations, but severely lacking in causal relations. It also uses other tactics like the constructed public, gaslighting, veiled threats, innuendo. And a lot of people have been quick to cite US regulations pertaining to election coercion and so on. Listen to Trump's language though, it's full of ambiguity, lacks clarity, and has a lot of faith-based statements. That is to say, it makes an assertion relying on no evidence. So rather than use Trump's actual inserts, recording, I know they've released it, I'm not sure how, a lot of people are putting it out there, I'm not sure how if it's copyrighted, if it's legally protected. Small YouTuber, what can I say? I just don't need the hassle of strikes. So Trump says, and I could tell you by our rallies, I could tell you by the rally I'm having on Monday night, the place, they already have lines of people standing out in front waiting. It's just not possible to have lost Georgia, it's not possible. So here Trump's linking the size of a rally to the possibility of some outcome. There's no causal relation here. I'm not even sure there's a correlation, but the mental picture is painted. Lots of people who do this means that something else. He goes on, having the people of Georgia are angry, and these numbers are going to be repeated on Monday night, along with others that we're going to have by that time, which are much more substantial even. And the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying, that you've recalculated. So here Trump is inferring that some nebulous they, the constructed public, is angry, and he is inferring the listener might be the focus of that anger, unless something else happens. Or maybe he's even inferring that he could direct that anger to the appropriate place, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink, inferred threats of violence. Again, Trump's inferring a causal relationship that exists. If you do this, all these people won't be angry with you. Otherwise. I also might interject another incident that happened recently where I think this is a story of TikTok social media and a young woman's application to a prestigious college in the United States of Americana land. So there was a video that surfaced. So this young woman, 4 or 5 years ago, was a girl coming onto the edge of womanhood. And when she was 15, did some stupid TikTok video. I don't know, was it TikTok or some Instagram? I didn't even know what it was. Some social media video where she'd used the N-word hard R. I don't think she was calling anybody this name. I think she might have just been reciting lines from a rap song. So 4 or 5 years goes by. She applies to college, gets an offer of her choice, and then some guy who's been sat on this for 4 or 5 years releases the video and creates a media storm, and the college is now like, well, unfortunately, sorry, we're just getting too much bad publicity and hundreds of emails about this, so we can't let you in. Now, to me, the response of the college there is reprehensible, but perhaps not for the reasons you might imagine. So first off, we can say, well, the difference between being a 15-year-old and a 19 or 20-year-old is substantial. She may have changed her views if she was at all racist, or she may say, yeah, I know, I was just citing some rap lyrics and now I know better, I've moved on in my thinking, it was a mistake at the time, and I harbour no racist sentiment. And but the college didn't investigate that. They just said, we've had too many complaints and bad publicity, too many emails, and so we're going to have to decline your position. Now, if that's the basis of their decision, too many emails complaining about this, then what happens if the young woman had turned around and said, you know what, that's unfortunate because I know of 1,000 Nazis who could be here tomorrow that would give you some real hassle. Shall I tweet out about how you are disenfranchising a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl a position of her choice based on what some non-American Latino type ambushed me with? Now, that really does ratchet up the, certainly brings escalation, but it's the same argument. Well, if you thought you had bad publicity now, I can really bring the rain. So by your own standards, you now have to let me in because you're going to get worse publicity that I might be directing at you in the future. Again, there's that threat. Here's what's going to happen, but he might not know when or where. Now, obviously, I don't know the full details of whether the college declined her position because they don't allow in racists, but what they seem to have said is we don't allow people in when they bring bad publicity. Not quite the same thing. So yeah, there's that, the inferred, constructed public, or bring 1,000 neo-Nazis to your campus. They are very angry with you, and it would be a shame if that anger was directed or misplaced. What it's inferring is that there may or may not be a public, but I can certainly conjure one up. Trump goes on. She stuffed the ballot. Each ballot went 3 times. They were showing. Here's ballot number 1. Here is a second time. Third time. Next ballot. Well, this is alliteration. We covered this technique a couple of episodes back, and it's a clever device in advertising. There's currently a UK TV commercial trying to launch a new car buying service. I won't mention the name, but the advert goes like this. Person number 1, you should use company name. Person number 2, company name. Person number 1, company name, yes. Company name makes it so easy so that you have the company name mentioned 3 or 4 times in a row. You can't not remember it. So walking people through an imagined scenario makes it easier to believe. It makes it easier for them to accept as a normalized human experience. It's how humans learn. Monkey see, monkey do. We tell, we demonstrate, we walk through. There, 3 ways of repeating the same thing to embed the information. So, you tell people what you're about to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you retell them what you've just told them. And actually, like some websites who have online selling, they'll actually have a video of somebody going through the selling process. Okay, you click this, you add it to your basket. There you can see it goes into your basket. And then you can add another one like this, or you can remove one like this, or you can add in the special offer like this, and it shows up in your basket. And when you've done that, you click this button, and then you enter your card details. And then when you've done that, you click this button, and your order will be dispatched. actually walked them through the process. Shows how easy it is. Shows that many other people have done it. Shows that it works with no problems. Alright, back to Trump. I mean, look, Brad, we have a new tape that we're going to release. It's devastating. And by the way, that one event is much more than the 11,000 votes that we're talking about. It's, that one event was a disaster. So here Trump is creating a definite event. Devastating. But with unknown time and place. He's inferring a devastating event. And by inference, you need to make sure that you're on the right side of it when it does come out, because you don't want to be on the wrong side of something devastating. But he fails to stipulate when and where. We already mentioned this tactic. Trump again. For some reason, they put it in 3 times, each ballot, and I don't know why. I don't know why 3 times, why not 5 times, right? Go ahead. Yes, 3 times. You tell people 3 times. After 3 times, people get it. Back to Trump. But that was... And Brad, why did they put the votes in 3 times? They put them in 3 times. It says... There's only 2 answers. Dishonesty or incompetence. There's just no way. Look, there's no way. And on the other thing, I said too, there is no way. I mean, there's no way that these things could have been, you have all these different people that voted and they don't live in Georgia anymore. So here, what have we got? A mix of black and white dichotomy. It's dishonesty or incompetence. Well, could be the truth. And the repeating of vacuous claims, how many times? There's just no way. Look, there's no way. And on the other thing I said too, there is no way. How many times? Yeah, it goes on. I won this election by hundreds of thousands of votes. There is no way I lost Georgia. There is no way. We won by hundreds of thousands of votes. I'm just going by small numbers when you add them up. They're many times the 11,000, but I won that state by hundreds of thousands of votes. How many times did he repeat that? And then how many different ways? Delusion. Based on what? Alright, he goes on. Do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumour is. And also, that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is really moving fast to get rid of their machinery. Do you know anything about that? Notice how Trump doesn't ask if this is correct or true or substantiated, but whether the person has knowledge of this or that. Trump does this a lot. I'm also reminded, for all his failings, and now it was a different time back then, and it's just not funny. Well, anyway, let me just mention Roy Chubby Brown. One of the standout jokes that I remember of his was some guy comes up to him and says, "Hey, Chubby, there's a rumour going round you've got a 12-inch cock." And Chubby says, "Yeah, I know, I started it." So as soon as people start asking me, "Have you heard the rumour?" I just leap to, "Yeah, well, did you start it?" But yeah, the other slippery thing here is asking people if they have knowledge of something rather than do they know if it's true or substantiated. Trump also asks about where people were on the day of the election. Where were the poll watchers? Where were the security guards? This invites the respondent to make a claim that's easily attacked. If you say, these people were in the building, how do you know that? Were you there? Where exactly in the building? And then any response can be attacked as being vague. Well, they were on the first floor. Yeah, well, whereabouts on the first floor? Well, but you know that for a fact? Well, no, I don't know that for a fact. Were you there? No. Well, you don't sound very sure about this. Here you can now build a pathway to discredit the respondent. So when the respondent says, "No, I didn't know about that rumour," an association is made. Ask enough of these types of questions. Did you know about this rumour? No, I didn't. Did you know about this claim? No, I didn't. Did you know about this rumour? No, I didn't know about that either. The questioner can then build a correlation. Gee, Brad, you don't seem to know a lot. This is one of those biases deliberately crafted where a series of questions is asked that can only be answered, "No, I didn't know that." And then the gestalt is created. "No, I didn't know. No, I didn't know. No, I didn't know." And this is a way of discrediting by asking these types of questions. Do you know where the security guard was exactly at all times? Well, no, of course not. Well, you don't seem to know very much, do you? It's just a ridiculous question. Trump goes on. "Oh, this isn't social media. This is Trump media. It's not social media." It's really not. It's not social media. I don't care about social media. I couldn't care less. Well, at least you got that right. Social media is big tech. Big tech is on your side. Ooh, that's a break. I don't even know why you have a side, because you should want to have an accurate election, and you're a Republican. The response was, "We believe that we do have an accurate election." Trump says, No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have. Not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes. You must have heard the rap remix of Melissa Carlone. Hundreds of thousands. That Paul Buck was off by hundreds of thousands. What did you do to it? Taking this and crazy to it? I love her. Well, when Trump says no, you don't, is Trump attacking the claim that the election was accurate? Or is he actually attacking Raffensperger's beliefs? Is Trump saying that Raffensperger doesn't actually believe that? I.e., he's inferring that Raffensperger is being less than honest. Trump goes on. Stacey, in my opinion, Stacey is as dishonest as they come. She has outplayed you at everything. She got you to sign a totally unconstitutional agreement, which is a disastrous agreement. You can't check signatures. I can't imagine you're allowed to do harvesting, I guess, in that agreement. That agreement is a disaster for this country, but she got you somehow to sign that thing, and she's outsmarted you at every step. And I hate to imagine what's going to happen on Monday or Tuesday, but it's very scary to people, you know, where the ballots flow in and out of nowhere. It's very scary to people. That consent decree is a disaster. It's a disaster. A very good lawyer who examined it said they've never seen anything like it. So opinions transmuted to fact. Again, the inferred, I hate to imagine what's going to happen, wink wink. It's like the old mafia boss, isn't it? Nice place you got here. Shame if anything was to happen to it. Have you paid your insurance this month? I mean, I doubt this seriously swayed seasoned lawyers or secretaries of state. In fact, I'd imagine they were insulted by this crass attempt. It's really, really lowball. And Trump goes on. And they're going around playing you and laughing at you behind your back, Brad. Whether you know it or not, they're laughing at you. And you've taken a state that's a Republican state, and you've made it almost impossible for a Republican to win because of cheating. Because they cheated like nobody's ever cheated before. Reminds me of a Cadbury's Flake advert. So that's a nice bit of gaslighting, installation of anxiety, and stating a fact as true whether you know it or not, or whether you are aware of it. In fact, you're not aware of it. You're not aware of this fact. And so, it's like a way of reverse engineering a fact. It's like, well, you don't know it's true because you didn't know it was a fact. And the fact that you didn't know it is just evidence as to why people are actually laughing at you. It's just gaslighting 101. He goes on, I don't know, look, Brad, I have to find 12,000 votes, and I have them times a lot, and therefore I won the state. That's before we go to the next step, which is in the process of right now. It's just delusional. I've seen this one before in business. If only I hadn't messed up, I would have succeeded. If only I'd have had 5 more numbers on the lottery, I would have won. Well, yeah, but it doesn't change it. And then what's he alluding to when he says, that's before we go to the next step, which is in the process of right now, as in this phone call, as in right now. Fucking hell. He goes on, and if you check with Fulton County, you'll have hundreds of thousands because they dumped ballots into Fulton County and the other county next to it. What kind of causality chain is that? Okay, here's a big one. He says, so what are we going to do here, folks? We, like I mentioned before, the I and the I and the you, the we and the they. He's very clever on using they are angry at you. What are we going to do to defend against that? Because when he says we, imagine, I'm the President of the United States and you, the listener, have some problem and I say, okay, what are we going to do? You might be tempted to believe that whatever you come up with in terms of an action plan involves the power of the office that I hold because we are doing this thing. So there's an inferred, we are in this. He says, I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. We have that in spades already. Or we can keep it going, but that's not fair to the voters of Georgia because they are going to see what happened and they going to see what happened. I mean, I'll take on anybody you want with regard to someone unnamed and her lovely daughter, a very lovely young lady, I'm sure, but unnamed. I will take on anybody you want. And the minimum, there were 18,000 ballots, but they used them 3 times. So that's, a lot of votes, and that's one event. And they were all to Biden, by the way. That's the other thing we didn't say, Unnamed. The one thing I forgot to say, which was the most important, that every single ballot she did win went to Biden. You know that, right? You do know that, by the way, Brad. So that's a veiled threat laid with a distraction and a promise to attempt to protect any counteractions, but no outcome is guaranteed. It's all innuendo and suggestion. And that, right, is one of those horrible phrases like, I love you, right? It's a passive-aggressive move. It removes the option of a no response without immediate conflict resulting. I love you, right? No. What do you mean? No. What do you mean? How dare you say that? After all I've done for you. And yeah, as I alluded to, he's inferring that he'll try and defend the actions of these people, by saying, I'll take on anybody you want. Well, taking them on is one thing, winning is another. This happens a lot in business, and it was a lesson I learned early on, actually, and I was taught it explicitly, so I didn't have to pay a very heavy price for this education. But oftentimes you'll be tempted or invited to skirt the regulations, to break a rule or two, and the person who's inviting you to do it will use some kind of ambiguous statement like, don't worry about it, it'll be okay, I'll look after you, I'll take on anybody you want in regard to your defence, or let me just chop down this tree that's in the way, it'll grow back in no time. And in a way, if you're stupid enough to believe it, you're kind of stupid enough to pay the penalty. In other words, think about the offer, the counter offer, think about the cost, think about the potential downsides, and also every time you accept a brown envelope, you're in someone else's pocket forever, because that can be pulled out and used against you at any time. Just don't put yourself in that position. So what else did he say? He says, every single ballot that she did through those machines at early in the morning went to Biden. Did you know that, Ryan? And the lawyer actually gives a good response here. He says, that's not accurate, Mr. President. Maybe I would have pushed back and pushed my luck and said, that's not accurate, Mr. President, don't you? Anyway, I'm sure you've heard the rest. It's delusional, and as we're used to now, it exemplifies the tactics of a dictator. We won the election, and then I presume the henchmen go out and make that statement true, or else. Anyway, back to the original script. The next thing to consider is distinctions. So I recall from a moment ago when we were talking about those specialist ganglion cells in the eye that, roughly speaking, detect different properties: contrast, colour, edges, movement, direction. So imagine what it would be like if you could only see in black and white, not even a shade of grey, but one bit colour. It's either pure white or pure black. And then if you had no edge detection or awareness of movement, it would be a very rudimentary experience, perhaps enough to detect a dark or lightness. And we might be able to infer that if there's a sudden darkness, it's either a cloud blocking out the sun or blocking out the light source. So something has approached. Is it a cloud, or is it a bird, a big bird coming over, or is it another one of me? So is it friend or foe? Is this something coming towards me to make sweet, sweet love, or is this something that wants to eat us for breakfast? It's only with the finer details that we're able to make the distinction. Abstract, if you will, to a more sophisticated social situation. You see your boyfriend or girlfriend, husband or wife, talking to someone else across the room at a party. It seems that this is enough to send some people into a bit of a jealous mood. After all, they say, they are my boyfriend or my girlfriend. I always preferred the term the girlfriend. Has less of a ownership thing about it, but it seems to tend the description more towards an object. The girlfriend, which has the objectification about it. My girlfriend has the ownership connotation. You just can't win with that one. Anyway, I wonder if there are not just two simplistic explanations for those going into a fit of jealous rage in this scenario. The first one is the virtue signalling. My relationship is so deep and precious that I have to get jealous and I have to impose myself when my boyfriend or girlfriend just looks at another person. Because, he's such a good-looking bloke, everyone's out to steal him, so I have to be so protective. It's kind of like bigging up the virtue. Apparently it just looks bad if no reaction at all comes, that someone else is talking to the boyfriend or the girlfriend without the former's permission. And if that goes on without punishment, it's obviously approval and in fact positive encouragement for those two to elope, and you're just asking to be cucked. Oh God, I hate that expression. Anyway, this first scenario is more about face saving. The second explanation, or second way, or second perspective, I suppose, of looking at this is a genuine overreaction, because the first person watching their partner talk with someone else lacks any kind of observed distinction. They are not observing or noticing the nuances. They're not spotting the colour, the distance between these two people having a conversation, the shapes of their bodies, the movements in relation to each other, whether they are leaning in, leaning out, how their body posture maintains a respectful distance or not, the number of times each looks away to others in the room while in conversation. These add in all those distinctions as compared to the cloudy black and white way of seeing things. It's these extra distinctions that give a fuller meaning to the situation. Plus also it seems to me that anxiety and stress does reduce the number of information channels we are able to process. We get focused in on one, we concentrate on it, and we start ignoring counterfactual information. Counterfactual? Extra information that counteracts our presuppositions is what I meant. And then we select those that paint the bleakest picture, those that are the greatest threat to our values. We hone in on what the risky element is and disconfirm the rest. We ignore it, we're tuned out from it, which makes us more anxious, and there is that vicious cycle of jealousy. What else could it be? Got to keep an open mind. Now, I've also from time to time the channel made digs at PragerU and cults and flat earthers and right-wing talking heads. They are of this ilk. Confirmation bias, yes, they see something, lack understanding of the topic at hand. Their preconceived notions already exclude the question of what else could it be, and this limits their information channels, and combined with a solipsistic, self-centered, egotistical charm, they boil down their bias to one or two items which are easily digested by their followers, who likewise want simple answers to appease their anxiety, regardless of truth, nuance, or willingness to engage, laced with and justified by virtue ethics or the appearance of doing the right thing. It's what Prager seems to specialise at. Indeed, their latest one that did the rounds was basically justifying slavery. And of course, let us not remember who funds PragerU, and they are very selective sometimes in the speaker who they pay to go on their channel. All you have to do is find some lunatic who's prepared to say on camera what you want them to say, and you pick them, pay them a lot of money, and they'll say the most outrageous thing, because they really believe it. Based on truth or not, well, you can always find some maniac to say anything for a fee. Speaking of which, check out the staunch conservative talking heads who talk about the media. Fake news. What, all of it? Every bit of it? Every bit of news is now fake. The way that this is expressed, fake news, that encompasses all news as fake, is such a huge generalization, such a simplified view of things, that it lacks any distinction, that we should be alert, of course, to this kind of overgeneralization. And I've long suspected that when people generalize like this, there's usually an agenda that they're trying to push. They refuse to look at nuance, because nuance invites a contradiction in their generalization. And obviously they don't want that, because then they are forced to take a hypocritical position, because they carry on saying what they're saying, but this time now with the knowledge that everyone knows it's a lie except them. So they either have to go into denial, like the copium wars of the late 2020s, or they have to take a hypocritical position. Anytime media doesn't think what they don't like, they will describe it in the most hilariously asinine way. It's never, oh, this network holds values that I don't agree with. It's always, this network has been subjected to a line of neo-Marxist cultural propaganda in which a user lexicon that is totally incomprehensible to the average person further indoctrinates, blah, blah, blah. Just word salad. A slightly more subtle tactic is revisionism, where history or words are redefined to prop up their argument. Redefine loss to mean win, so that the statement, I won the election, can be said in earnestness, when winning is actually redefined to mean losing. I suppose that's one way of doing it, hence all that double think of George Orwell. We're also seeing in Hungary, where their parliament has redefined the concept of family. Let's say adoption then is limited to existing stable families. We might want that. That might be a good thing to, for the children concerned, but then we redefine family to strictly mean a man and a woman in a relationship or married. See now how that conveniently discriminates against same-sex relationships. And this is it, they can't be honest and say, we don't want gay couples adopting. They have to redefine words to maintain their dirty tactics, rather than just being honest about it, because they know that they can't be honest about it. And in doing so, they're bending reality to them, rather than them comporting to reality. The reality is that children brought up in same-sex with same-sex guardians don't suffer any adverse effects. In fact, there's, I think, a little bit of evidence that suggests they come out slightly ahead. And there are interesting explanations for this. I remember from reading about trust law, you've got to be careful when you leave things and put them in a trust and then say the beneficiaries are family members. You've got to be quite careful about that, because what does family mean? So while defining things does reduce ambiguity, it can be destructive, where, for one, the person is living in a very impoverished model of the world, and two, worse, when they try to enforce this and its poor implications on others, like defining what family is to deny them the opportunity of adopting, or taking hormone blockers, or identifying with their preferred neonoun. I mean, what does it matter what people call themselves and how other people identify? It only matters to them. Why should we take that away from them and tell them, no, you can't identify in the way that you see fit. It has to be the way I see fit, and I'm the final arbiter on defining what these words mean. What kind of world is that? You know, to deny somebody their own personal expression of their meaning and experience of life. Again, I come back to this notion of projection that it's almost it's beyond anecdote now. It almost happens every time. You know, you'll see the right-wing politician get up there, or the right-wing evangelical preacher going out there talking about how homosexuality is akin to bestiality, and without fail, 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, or a year later, he's found in some coke den in a 15-member underage gay orgy. Happens every time. You know, it's almost like they can't accept, or they don't want to accept who they are, and therefore, again, they have to deny everyone else their ability to live life on their terms, because then it's fair. Anyway, a couple of extra comments before moving on, while adding in many more. Properties and attributes to more fully describe the rich experience of life can, for some, it seems, be overwhelming and introduce complexity that they can't or don't want to understand. You know, that's fine, I suppose. But I find it offensive when people get into positions of power to enforce this impoverished view of the world on everyone else. It reeks of the Charles Manson equity model. Nah, life is too complicated, I don't understand it, it needs to be simplified to black and white, and therefore I need to bring everyone else down to my low IQ level so that I can compete fairly, rather than lift up, and they want to sink everyone down. You surely have recognised this. Surely you've seen this kind of black and white thinking with us, or with the terrorists. Gender only comes in two flavours. Sex is what a man does to a woman in the missionary position. Anything else is depraved. This either happens or it doesn't. Therefore you have a 50-50 chance. Really simplistic. Not sophisticated distinctions at all. Of course, small distinctions add up. You know, you can do the maths. What's the difference of a compound interest of 5% over 30 years compared to 5.2 over 30 years? Small distinctions add up. What's the difference in deaths from a global pandemic that has a R0 of 1 compared to 1.1? So yeah, indulge yourself, take any metaphor, and there are many from the self-help gurus, you know, ship or aeroplane, 500-mile journey, 1 degree off course, ends up miles off target, so it's constant correction along the way, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, this leads into sensitivity, and I'll get back to that when we cover off risk and risk modelling. Yeah, I mean, I already alluded to it in the episode. I did a very quick one on tests. Sensitivity and specificity tests in regard to testing for the current contagion, you know, to do with medical testing for things like nasty viruses. It's two different ways to approach it to get the right answer. And here is another distinction, specifically about movement and behaviour, and feelings especially. We don't express them too well in words, we do them. And this is something to pay attention to. Some of us are very wordy and literal, and don't have extensive sensitivity to exquisite behaviour, even sometimes to our own. So I think, you know, we've laboured the point here. There are differences on many dimensions, on many channels, both in terms of the SVO model, the thoughts, the feelings and perceptions, and the so-called modality channels, what we see, what we hear, what we do and how we feel, and as observed in others, and as observed from different perceptual positions. Also, our own experience is subjective and shifts with context. So a couple of episodes back, it might have been on the behavioural economics episodes, I made mention of the hot wash and the cold wash. You know, right after a battle or armed conflict, or indeed intensive sports, something with high physical effort and high emotional engagement, like near-death experience, like combat. The emotional component of experience will be high. Only a bit later, when things have calmed down and the adrenaline's flushed out, will logic and reason and cool contemplation be possible. So, you do the hot wash whilst you're emotionally hot, and then you go and have a shower or something to get cooled down, and then you analyse it with a bit of a more cooler head. I suspect this is also why playing a musical instrument is great. It links the movement to the sound, and the finest distinctions, both of movement and its associated sound, are learned. And in this process, we learn about nuance, the slight difference in how we tap the ivories on the piano keyboard with slightly different impact, or different pacing, or different distances between the fingers to play different notes. And we develop an exquisite sensitivity to the physical action and the sound it makes. So that is an excellent way to learn nuance. Anyway, so that's a bit of an introduction here, the concept of developing and utilising underused perceptions, underdeveloped distinctions, in all terms of time, space, possibility, necessity, sensitivity, and from first position, second position, and third perceptual position, as expressed through the subject, verb, and object of our described experience. I think this is where a lot of racism and prejudice comes from as well, the lack of richness and experience of life. It's not what is real, it's what they perceive to be real, unfortunately. A lot of those perceptions are skewed by institutional and legacy systems. There's one that stands out in my mind, and it was a chap I was talking to years and years ago, and I still haven't forgot it. And he actually had a thing for black women. He found them very attractive, but he held strong prejudice towards black people. And I said, but why? And he said, well, I'll never forgive them for what they did in the Brixton riots. And I thought, well, does he actually know how the Brixton riots were started? That might have changed his perception of things. Again, that's kind of, a lot of the misconceptions about the BLM thing. And again, I think it also comes with a hint that it's not fair that all this attention and rights and equity redress are going towards black people. What about the white people? Well, again, that's literally black and white thinking. It's not just about equity for one group, because that's not equity, is it? It's equity for everyone. But of course, the most disenfranchised are hurt the most and have the most grievance, and will of course seek greater redress. I've heard some otherwise successful people earnestly ask, why is it that they had to work so hard for their house, but an immigrant gets one given to them for free? Doesn't happen. It's a myth. It's xenophobic rhetoric that's repeated. Same thing goes on with the TERFs and trans-medicalists. And that transgender is a mental issue. Nothing's going to change their beliefs about this. They've formed their opinion, they've locked in their belief, they won't look at the evidence, because if they realise they're wrong, they'll be forced to change. And, what's that saying, that change is never selected for, but always forced? Oh, and speaking of change, at the time of writing, soon-to-be President-elect has written an executive order restricting the design of future federal buildings to be beautiful. What the fuck does that mean? But what it means is a return to the past, traditionalism, conservatism, restriction and inhibition of the art of architecture. No new thinking allowed, no new modern ways allowed. It's a return to the good old days of colonial buildings. I keep meaning to get onto architecture. It's fascinating, the kind of way that architecture actually installs feelings in us, and how churches and cathedrals are designed to actually inspire and create a little bit of fear and awe, such that when you enter them, you're already feeling the presence of gold. Anyway, we've been here before with life values and life goals and matching them up, that kind of thing, where you list out and rank your values, and then you find tasks and goals that are an enjoyable thing to do, which also match and align with those values that are ranked in order, and that our goals and tasks support those values across different domains of life. We've covered that off a couple of times now on the channel. It's also through listening to others now, rather than self-focused, that we learn from them, their meta-programs, by way of which words they use and emphasize in the SVO model. And quickly we can establish whether information or knowledge is missing, and using the principles of experimentation and verification to know whether the correct information is possessed, or whether it's the actions that are missing, the doing bits that are misaligned. So, if we spend all our time doing the things that are not in fulfillment of our core values, of course it's not going to get us where we want to go. And that's another big one, time. actually setting aside the time to do that thing or those things that are in alignment with our core values. And only that one thing, by the way. And this exercise builds that discipline. So if we say, okay, I've now identified, my values in different aspects of my life, work, pleasure, family, whatever categories are important to you. And then you work out what tasks and things you like to do that fulfill those values in those domains. You've got to actually then allocate time to do it. And I think it's a good exercise to set aside an hour and then just do those tasks that are fulfilling those goals in that hour. Even if you take like a minute to do it and you're done, 59 minutes should be spent doing nothing, because it creates a discipline then. You don't start to mingle in tasks that are superfluous or distracting tasks that don't serve you. So you slowly build a discipline to just focus on doing those things that actualize your goals, that actualize your values. What's really happening here is by limiting the hour to doing that one thing also creates the required distinctions for those actions. That is to say, you make the distinction now between doing the things that are in line with your goals and, for lack of a better word, getting distracted or time wasting on trivial things that might grant an immediate gratification but are not actually getting your goals met. So you start to build a distinction of, is this task in or is this task out of satisfying my life goals? It's like I mentioned the metaphor of learning to play a musical instrument. The sensitivity is built, the nuance is realized, and the finesse gets integrated more fully in those actions we do, and the framework eventually emerges that we now have developed a way of more or less now, after a while, automatically knowing the things to do that are going to get our goals met and knowing the things to stay away from. We've built that distinction. We've built that model of nuance. So maybe that's helpful. And just as a note, these frameworks can extend beyond individual values, of course. They extend into social and cultural values. And these ebb and flow with the times. They come into fashion, go out of fashion. The conservatives seeking to keep and guard what worked, and progressives seeking to bring change and relax the grip of institutions that govern the ways that once served but are now actually limiting and outdated. I mentioned in a previous video, check out the major city skylines of the 1970s and compare with today. It's just 50 years, but just the sheer number of people on the planet now compared to the 1970s makes certain ways just impractical. Once there were no speed limits on the motorways, or once there was no motorways. But even with safety improvement in road design and car safety and tyre technology, speed limits have remained about the same. It's the story of the cake in the oven. I'm sure you've heard it. A young woman makes the recipe for the cake, but cuts it in half and cooks it on two separate shelves in the oven. And her children say, Mummy, why do you cut the cake like that? Oh, it's how it was done. It's the proper way. And then years and years go by, and eventually, mum bumps into her mum, and through conversation happens to casually ask, why do you cut the cake in half and cut it on two separate shelves? And, her grandmother, says, well, we only had a small oven, and so, that was the only way it fit in one sitting. That's the only reason why. It's just a matter of practical implementation. So, the point is, different ways of seeing and experiencing the world, and out of these experiences, which were all in the moment, at the moment, they happened, we create the content. And that's great, and we get on with life, but after a while, sometimes a long time, sometimes a short time, that content becomes outdated and obsolete. And rather than move with the times, some people insist on holding on to these outdated ideas. Others find a way of recycling that content and selling it for more than it's worth. We write books about it, we put seminars on about it, and create models to explain it all, but it's all lagging indicators. Point is, we're influenced by the past. It certainly projects into the future. And some of the beliefs we hold about this place are not only from our parents, but from our grandparents. Some of the beliefs that we have in our heads are based on ideas and notions that were formed 2 or 3 generations ago. The significance of this becomes apparent when we realise people react to their map of the world rather than the world itself. And the map is not a territory. It's a useful guide for those who are lost. But then you have to know where you are to know in which direction to go on that map. Unless you just like to wander. No value judgments. Wanderers have played an important role in civilizations. But there is a twist in the tale, of course. When a young child watches the Frankenstein movie for the first time, they will see the monster and call it Frankenstein. It's said that it's knowledge that tells us that Frankenstein was the scientist and that his creation was the monster. That's a fact. That's knowledge. But it is the wisdom to know that Frankenstein was actually the monster. Likewise, it's often cited Schrodinger's cat experiment. The folklore has bastardized it into woo-woo peddling, quantum life coaching and the law of attraction shit. And they use these thought experiments like Schrodinger's cat to push the notion that things are in superposition until one looks, and then it's the act of looking that manifests, and it's the thought of curiosity that causes us to look in the first place. So all you have to do is think it, and then observe it. It's a compelling story. It requires no effort to bring about these outcomes. All you've got to do is think and believe hard enough. And it's also the Fred Hoyle's Big Bang. He was mocking people who put forward the description of the inflation of the universe. So he used the Big Bang term as a derogatory statement, but now it's been taken back and owned, and we all know what we mean by Big Bang, and it's not seen as a derogatory anymore. But the actual intention of Schrödinger was to highlight how absurd the notion of changing things by observing them is. The cat in the box was an elaborate story, an over-the-top story. It was Schrödinger's slippery slope argument, deliberately made so, to highlight how easy it is to arrive at absurdities of cats being both alive and dead in a superposition, but only at observation does one of them coalesce. It's not a claim or statement about how quantum physics is. It's an absurd, slippery slope fallacy, deliberately made to highlight the ridiculousness, just like how Cannibal Holocaust was such an over-the-top, ridiculous film to highlight the hypocrisy and ignorance of people who call themselves enlightened, which resulted in a producer in court for murdering the crew of the film that was made that was so over the top. It's the difference between a blurry, out-of-focus photograph where the edges of things can't be determined, and a sharp, crisp and in-focus photograph of a cloud whose edges are equally ill-defined. To say these things are the same is the mistake of concluding Schrödinger's cat is a system in superposition. And finally, the secret is the map actually is the territory. It's the only thing we have. We don't have direct access to this thing of actual reality, only our perception of it and our modelling of it. It's the best we have, and in that sense, the map is the territory. Of course, these distinctions need to be made first. It's a full circle kind of thing, hero's journey kind of thing. You can't just come out and say the map is the territory, because everyone knows that is ridiculous, just like everyone knows that it's Frankenstein's monster created by the scientist, but actually no, Frankenstein is the monster. But you have to come full circle to understand why. It's useful, of course, that our maps have correspondence with the territories, some more than others. And we're getting better at refining those maps and discovering new maps. And of course, some have vested interest in selling old maps. They've yet to recoup their investment. And some have bought so heavily into certain maps